If you're a Sonic fan, at some point you're gonna need help playing the game.
Those were the first words I said on Krheanos Island, and that was exactly 1 year ago. Over these past 366 days, I've felt nothing but appreciation for what I've managed to make myself on YouTube. So, to celebrate the New Year's and the first anniversary of this channel, we're gonna compile every classic Sonic video I've made into a 3-hour long video. If you're new to the channel and this is the first video you're seeing, then good, because this is most likely the definitive version of any of my videos. Do be aware that even though the videos are in Sonic chronological order, these weren't made in order. For example, the Labyrinth Zone video is actually the first video reviewing the classic Sonic games I made. But for those who have already watched all my videos, there's actually still a good reason to watch this video, because inside this video is going to be a secret video which I've never shown before. That being said, I hope you all enjoyed the compilation.
If I asked you if Labyrinth Zone or Springyard Zone, the two levels we reviewed, can compete with some of the best levels in the other classic Sonic games like Sonic 2 or Sonic 3 and Knuckles, chances are, most of you would say no. Yes, Labyrinth Zone is a great zone, but if you want to compare it to the levels like Metropolis Zone, Wing Fortress Zone, Hydro City, or Angel Island, yeah, no. Those levels have a perfect mix between platforming and speed, with a hint of exploration so you can find stuff you never found before. Actually, Sonic 2's worst zones are Metropolis and the endgame. The earlier parts of Sonic the Hedgehog 2 are for nice visuals, speedy action, and fun platforming to greatly enhance the formula of Sonic the Hedgehog. However, this next zone we're covering, some people might consider might be one of the best zones ever. We're of course talking about Green Hill Zone, the utopian paradise we've come to know and know. But I'm here to tell you that in reality, this place is absolutely nothing short of complete boredom. Well, what do we have here about good stuff for Green Hill? I mean, the level looks good. The trees, mountains, and blue sky really do set up with how perfect this place looks, and this place looks really nice. But the trees in the middle ground, they look like plastic. Every other zone that has a middle ground layer looks so real and really adds a lot to the general feel of the area. Marble has its large pine trees, Springyard has its bushes, Starlight has its construction pillars, and Scrapbrain has its industrial buildings, and it really helps make the look and feel better. But maybe it's the way they're so indifferent in height, or maybe it's the way it's so obviously repeated, but these trees look so weird and unnatural. That's not exactly what you want from a completely natural setting. One thing I do truly love about Green Hill Zone, however, is that it is a great introduction to Sonic 1. The game doesn't stop you at all times, and there's no overwhelming gimmicks. You can obviously see that they put a lot of time into this level. Everything you need to know about Sonic controls and physics are taught in this level, and the rest of the game just builds on it. Jumping, rolling, huge slopes, bouncing on enemies, it's all here. However, I did say this level isn't perfect. In fact, it isn't even great. So here's some stuff I really don't like about Green Hill Zone. Okay, to start off, while I did say this level teaches the player about the physics, it doesn't do the level design any favors. Just look at a level map from Marble Zone Act 3, now look at one from Green Hill Act 3. It's so drastically different that it's not even funny. It's linear, a straight line, barely any alternating paths or secrets, and a straight line to the goal. And that brings me to my main problem with this level. This level is so boring, like it's draining. In order to 100% Sonic 1, you need to collect 50 rings in Act 1 or 2 and reach the end with it so you can enter the special stage. In Green Hill, you don't even need to go out of your way to collect rings at all. You can literally beat these sets of acts without letting go of right and occasionally jumping. This level design is so unfun and really uninteresting, and I literally can 100% this level by collecting every ring and killing every single enemy by memory. This isn't a joke, so there's nothing I haven't done in these levels, and it's not even fun. Act 2 steps it up with the bottom middle section with ring boxes and a shield, and a whole bottom route with a 1-up at the end. Act 3 definitely has it the best, with a great percentage being split in 2 parts, but these levels are still extremely boring, uninteresting, and not fun on breezy playthroughs. Take Springyard, a level I truly dislike. Act 1 level design is really linear but also quite vertical too. I'm not asking for triple trouble standards, but on an opening level, it doesn't have to be this easy and linear. The classic Sonic games aren't meant to be played once. They're meant to be explored and replayed. Take Sonic 3's Angel Island Zone, the opening level. Basically, the whole level has separate paths that intersect, allowing for many playthroughs of different kinds. Sure, I've played those to the point that it's not even surprising, but after the second playthrough of Green Hill, I knew every single part of it, meaning optimization for rings or time wasn't a thing anymore. And also, we need to talk about the freaking boss! Now look, I know we've seen these bosses plenty of times and it's gotten annoying, but I'm not comparing any of them or factoring it into why I dislike these. The problem with this boss is that it's way too easy. I mean, just look at the footage. Take Sonic 3's first boss. The boss was easy, but it was challenging. They didn't put an invincibility monitor right before the boss. Like, why would you do that? And even without it, the pattern isn't that hard to find out. If anyone takes a good look at this boss and already knows how the physics in Sonic 1 looks like, they'll know what to do. And it doesn't help that you can literally get 5 hits in for free. In conclusion, the level is really good. The layout can be entertaining and good, but once you finished it like 2 times, the level design gets extremely boring, and the boss fight definitely needs some work. Oh my god. It's time to talk about Marble Zone. While I think Spring Yard is the worst level in Sonic 1 because of the enemies, blocks, and the boss fight, Marble Zone is the opposite. There are so many things I absolutely adore from Marble Zone, and I truly think it's better than most zones in Sonic 2. Yeah, I know, that's a really big hot take, but come on. I think Marble Zone is good, and nobody, and I mean nobody, is ready for my later hot takes. So without further ado, let's start with the imperfections of this beautiful masterpiece. Firstly, while the level design in this level is immaculate, there are definitely parts in this level that are an unfair drag. In the very beginning of Act 3, there's one of those sections where you need to stand on the green block and jump over purple ones, but this one is unlike any other one in the level because there's no secret 1-up and a ton of rings to get, there's no interesting set pieces like fireballs or crushing spike walls or anything like that. You are here just waiting for the stupid lava geyser to blast you up, followed by waiting for another green block to pop out of the wall, which literally takes ages. And it doesn't really help that you can get there when it comes back in, so you have to wait for like another a bajillion seconds just for it to come back out. This is definitely one of the most pace-breaking parts of the zone. There's quite a few parts of the zone that are extremely boring. There's nothing interesting to do in said parts, and the level design of Marble Zone, which is not quite the same as Green Hill, isn't really helping itself to have extremely slow and boring level design. And these are the parts that people tend to hyper-focus on when you're talking about the negatives of the zone. Sure, if you miss the geyser jump in that section in Act 3, you're basically dead. But hey, didn't your favorite level, Green Hill, already teach you how to do stuff like that? Another problem I have with this zone is its badniks. Now, hey, it's not as bad as Spring Yard's, because at least I know how to kill the caterpillars, but goddammit, some of the caterpillars are placed in the most inconvenient places known to man. If you don't want to get hit, then you pretty much have to know they're already there. My last complaint is something I like to call accessibility. Accessibility is how easy or difficult it is to get 50 rings to get to the end of the stage, and where you want your accessibility to be in a level is actually medium. You want it to make it a challenge to get 50 rings, but you don't want it to be that you'll be getting hit over and over again and there's like scarcity of rings so you won't be able to get after you get hit like 2 or 3 times. So yeah, I said Marble Zone is bad, and Green Hill Zone is too, and I think Spring Yard's the best of all of them so far, and Marble Zone doesn't change that. If you want to survive the horrors of fast and random fireballs, spikes coming out of the ground, and those freaking caterpillars, then yeah, you're gonna have to look up a level map, because you ain't getting nowhere. And honestly, those are my only real complaints of Marble Zone. With that being said, let's get to the absolute peakness of this zone. Just like my last video talking about a zone that is really controversial, let's start with the less problematic stuff. Firstly, the atmosphere in this zone is absolutely jaw-dropping. Really? An ancient ruin with white pillars, large skinny trees, mountains, and an underground section with torches and handles? How could you not love that? By far the best looking zone in Sonic 1, and is on par with Quas Quadrant, another level I love for the beautiful backgrounds and great environments. Secondly, the music is absolutely bumping! Labyrinth does have the best non-boss song in the game, but the best non-boss section of any song in Sonic 1 obviously goes to Marble Zone's. And thirdly, let's talk about the boss fight. I do think it's worse than Labyrinth Zone's boss, but it definitely isn't by much. Marble Zone's boss difficulty is perfectly crafted, unlike some other levels. Unlike most, there isn't just one attack, and if you try to beat this boss damageless, my god, you'll have a really big problem. And that's good! Less experienced players should just take the easy way out, but more experienced players should be able to do so. easy to beat, difficult to master. Isn't that what you guys love so much about your hunk of junk you guys call Sonic Adventure 2? I'm just kidding, guys. Sonic Adventure 2 is my favorite Sonic game too. I love its speedy action, intense story, and breathtaking visuals. Are they gone? Okay. Now that part all of you have been waiting for, the level design. Look man, there's only one thing I have to say about the complaints here, and that's, damn bro, you are really complaining for nothing because you have no freaking reason to do so. In Act 3, right after the part I was yapping about my bad stuff about Marble Zone, there's a secret wall allowing you to skip huge portions of the level. In every other guidance section of the level except that one part in Act 3, there's either a way to jump over everything using momentum, you know, the things you guys like about— No, I already made that joke. Or, you could have hidden items in the wall, and still also have a way to get up faster than the gizzer lets you. There's nothing to really complain about with most of this level design, because if you don't like it, you can just skip it by being good at the game. And then like a certain person said, you can do it without flinging yourself off the screen, something that was not intentionally left in by the developers. So yeah. In conclusion, while the occasional hiccups, questionable set pieces, and even more questionable enemy placements can be frustrating, the beautiful background and aesthetic, the appropriate level design, and the bumping music more than make up for the level's minor flaws. I've already given out my general opinion on Sonic 1, but the more I play it, the better it gets. I might just think that Sonic 1 is better than Sonic 2, but that's a whole other argument that I'm not really ready to dive into today. At the end of my defending Labyrinth Zone video, I said that there's any level that I hate more than any other zone in Sonic 1 that people should really be hating on, that it's Springyard Zone. And today, I'm here to show you why Springyard Zone is the worst zone in Sonic 1. Of course, like Labyrinth Zone, there still are some good stuff about this level, some really cool stuff. For one, sliding it down those huge slopes is really fun. There's one towards the end of like almost every act, and for two, this level has a really good amount of exploration in it. For some more loved levels in this game like Green Hill Zone, the level is really linear. There is stuff to see, but it's not much, to the point where you can memorize everything and know where everything is, so there's no point, it's not really exploring. But Springyard's exploration is good. There's walls that you can go into to complete a little bit of a platforming to get a 1-up or a ton of rings. If you backtrack a bit in some sections of the level, you can go back and find shields and ring boxes. The secret places in this level are implemented really well, and I know I haven't even seen it all yet. Another thing I like about Springyard is that besides the exploration I've widely praised, these levels go by quite fast. Memorizing the level is your best bet, and if you know what you're doing, you can beat some of these levels extremely fast. Now that the few good things about these godforsaken levels are done with, let's get to the horrible things. Remember how I said that exploration and speed are both implemented well in this level? Well, that's not all the time. Multiple times in a single act, if you don't know how to skip some of these, you will meet a set of blocks that you need to jump over. And these blocks move so pitifully slow. And I know, I praise Labyrinth for that, but that's because you technically can still move at your own pace. Deciding on whether you want to go on ahead or take a bubble is your choice, and learning the timing on the speed makes it possible to go even faster. You can even damage boost through it, with the invincibility frames give you time to walk through them, or using an invincibility monitor to go through all of them. But either this is your first playthrough or your 10th playthrough, you have to go through these stupid blocks, which are everywhere in the level, mind you, and you have no way of doing anything to speed it up. Even if you jump to the next block as soon as possible, the level will punish you by crushing you. So yeah, this level doesn't have the best level design. But you know what this level does have? It has the worst enemies in the classic Sonic games. We have crab meats that will now shoot at you, and they put one after a set of blocks which you can't avoid. You have your spikes that will hit you no matter how you hit them, and to this day, I still don't know how to hit them. And of course you have your buzz bombers, who at the start of Act 1 will come and hurt you while you're in a block section and you can't get out, so like there's no way to avoid it. Wow, what a horrible set of enemies. The only thing that I think that could make this even worse if there's an enemy that came to you rolling in a ball at a really high speed from behind you, so they had absolutely no time to react, and afterwards when you tried to kill it, it started rolling into a ball again. Thank God that enemy doesn't exist, or it'd be one of the worst enemies in the classic Sonic games. No, but seriously, this game is so... Oh God, this enemy is so unfairly placed. You'll be having the time of your life, gaining momentum from downward slope, but oh well, Springyard says, oh wait, your 30 seconds of enjoying this hellhole of a level is over. You have quite literally no time to react to this enemy flying towards you. And maybe you're saying I should blame the enemy and not the level, but firstly, that doesn't even make sense considering they put this here in mind. And secondly, this is the only zone where these pieces of garbage show up in, so no, I'm playing the level. You know what else this level has? The worst music in Sonic 1. In my Labyrinth video, I said that Sonic 1's soundtrack was very consistent, and while it still is, this level's music is the same with Marble Garden. These tracks sound like they're made for filler or something. These tracks are boring and extremely repetitive. But oh wait, it's time to us to talk about the stupid boss. Oh God. Springyard's boss fight essentially works like some kind of weird sort of timer. Eggman tries to drill Sonic, but in the process, Eggman drills the ground and breaks the ground underneath him. So you need to get 8 hits on him before Eggman pulls all the blocks from under you. This sounds like a really cool idea, but in reality, not only is the boss extremely easy, it's also super slow and unfair. Sometimes you're just doing damage to Eggman when the ground you were standing on, which he didn't pull out, will somehow have you fall and die. And while he's in the air, you can't hit him, and he moves incredibly slow. He drills the right side of the screen, then slowly goes over to the left, so just alternate between the sides for the fastest fight. And yeah, that's his only move. Hydrocity has the mini-boss in this same fashion, but not only can you still hit him while he's airborne on his own, he throws bombs down which shoot up water so that you can step on it and hit him. So Springyard's Zoss is very dumb, as is with this whole level. Oh God, like, seriously, Sonic 1 is underrated, alright? Sonic 1's underrated, but I really hate Springyard, right? It's not fun. I won't say it's like a downright, like, unplayable level. There's still some stuff I like about it. Like, you know, that rolling stuff, the exploration, like, the little platforming challenges they have you do. It's not, like, bad, but, like, it's just the worst level in Sonic 1, like, in every aspect. In conclusion, while the level does have plenty of moments where platforming towards hidden monsters are fun, and the occasional drop of a huge slope is satisfying, the slow platforming of the blocks, the horrible enemy placement in the levels, the repetitive music, and the boss fight really ruined this level, and that's why I think this is the worst level in Sonic 1. Sonic 1. It's alright, I'm in the middle with this one. It's not really a bad game, but it's not as good as a game like Sonic 3 and Knuckles. But I would be lying if I said I enjoyed the game a lot less than Sonic 2. I've seen plenty of people talk about their criticism of the game, and to be honest, a lot of it is true. The levels are extremely wacky. Having Green Hill immediately follow up with Marble Zone isn't exactly the easiest conversion into platforming from speed. The enemy placements and not being able to see what's ahead seems to be the worst of the classics. But there is one thing people constantly beat this game down on that I truly do not think it deserves. And that criticism comes in the form of a whole zone, and that is, of course, Labyrinth Zone. Okay, I do still believe that there's some stuff wrong with Labyrinth Zone. Firstly, let's say you're playing Sonic 1 and you're trying your best to collect all the 6 Chaos Emeralds. Well, if you fail to get the Chaos Emerald one time from the very start of the game, you get all... because now you have to collect 50 rings and keep them all until the end of the level. And this has to be one of the most infuriating things that has ever been done in a classic Sonic game. They decided to put an enemy that you quite literally can't avoid in front of a bubble column. This part is not only really close to the end, but you're pretty much guaranteed to have a bad time there. The only way for you to even be able to pass this place is by speedrunning your way through while holding your invincibility, which is earlier in the level. Enemy placement and those spikes can be absolutely insane here. To me, if you miss a Chaos Emerald maybe in Springyard or Marble Zone, don't try and get it in Labyrinth Zone. Do it in Starlight, although that's also unfairly difficult in some places. Another big problem with Labyrinth Zone is surprisingly the boss fight. In my opinion, it's not the fight itself. I think it's actually a really fun test of skill. It's that if you die once, you have to either A, start from the entire level all over again, which is what I did, or B, start from the checkpoint before the climb and only have one shield to help you with the fight. No rings. I don't even know what happened. How can you not put rings before a boss fight? when you literally put one before every other boss in the game except for the final boss. This is probably why a lot of people really don't like the boss fight, because they essentially get one shot to do the climb with rings. Mostly the problem with Labyrinth Zone is because of the bad enemy placement and the lack of rings in some specific places. Now that all the factually bad stuff of Labyrinth is done, let's get into some good things about Labyrinth Zone. Yes, I like underwater physics, and no, I'm not taking it back. But that's for a bit later. For now, let's talk about the less controversial thing, the music. To be completely honest, the entire Sonic 1 soundtrack is extremely underrated. Every other classic Sonic game, there's one track that sucks. Sonic 2 has Metropolis, Sonic CD has the entire US soundtrack, and Sonic 3 has Marble Garden. But Sonic 1 has, in my opinion, one of the most consistent soundtracks in the classic games. And Labyrinth is most certainly one of the best songs in the classic Sonic games, but it really shines on its own game as the best non-boss song in the game. The music in Labyrinth Zone is so good, it really got me like... Let's talk about the more controversial stuff. The most prominent problem with Labyrinth Zone that I see plenty of people talk about is how you're slow underwater and how it breaks the pace of the game. Personally, I don't think people understand the consequences of not having slower movement. If you had normal movement, you would be slipping and sliding and getting hit more than you already are. Normal physics combined with those speeds would not be ideal, and I can bet you'd hate the level more than you already do. The jumping underwater does feel a bit slow, but it's nothing too acceptable for some people to dog on the level like this. Another problem people face is drowning, and to be completely honest, I didn't drown once during the playthrough, except for the one time for community purposes. The people who hate this game with a burning passion try to play this like Green Hill, which would end up being you bumping into everything up and down. If you see an air bubble, wait for the bubble to come up so you can breathe. You will always have less time than you think you do, so just stay and wait for a bubble. Try not to get hit, try to optimize your invincibility shields, try to keep your shield, wait for the spears to retract, and wait for the right time to get hit by the Gorgon thing or whatever. Just get good. I'm sorry, but you guys make it seem like it's the worst thing in the world when in reality it's not that bad. It's hard to face, but Labyrinth Zone isn't bad. You are. Now this is total nonsense. You can literally skip the entire level by skipping the elevator, and to be honest, I've only gone through the normal way once. You can literally do it in 30 seconds. There's absolutely nothing for you to be complaining about. There's not much to say. It's not that hard. You guys stop overacting. It's not that hard. Come on, it's not that hard. All in all, Labyrinth Zone is good. You have a skill issue, and it's 8 out of 10. Bye. Okay, hi guys. I didn't actually mean you guys have a skill issue. There's probably some of you there that are better than me and still don't like this game. But it's this game and it's a level, so I'm just trying to say that you guys are overreacting. It's not that bad. You guys make it sound like some of the later Sonic levels I was talking about. You make it sound like, oh no, this level is so bad. Oh my goodness gracious. If you guys should be dogging on any level, it should be Spring Yard. That level is boring, it's slow, not the even kind of slow that Labyrinth is, where there's stuff to avoid and stuff. This is the kind of slow where you're just waiting for blocks. Nobody talks about Spring Yard the way they talk about Labyrinth Zone. Labyrinth Zone is a good level, and I'm gonna defend it with my life. So far into this review, we haven't had any zones that aren't on the extremes. Labyrinth Zone is extremely good, Spring Yard is the worst, Green Hill is good, and yes, I think it's good. I just said it's not as good as the majority of people say, and Marble Zone is absolutely amazing. However, Starlight Zone is really the most mediocre level here. There's a lot of stuff I actually love about Starlight Zone, but there's also a lot of stuff I really dislike. So, let's talk about it. Honestly, this zone's main thing I actually adore about it is that this is Green Hill Zone done perfectly. I love this zone's level design. In fact, it's almost perfect. A lot of comments between my videos really opened my eyes about why people really like Green Hill so much and why people don't like Marble Zone and Labyrinth Zone. The reason why people don't like these zones, as far as I can see, is that Sonic's one momentum isn't used in these zones. In Green Hill, there are plenty of slopes and loops for you to roll onto and off of. Marble and Labyrinth Zone don't have that, and while I still do prefer those zones over Green Hill, the criticisms are very valid, and honestly, it is fun to sometimes roll down huge slopes and find curved terrain. So, by explaining that, the ideal level design I prefer would be a level mostly focused on platforming, plenty of secrets to find, a good amount of verticality to it, and with occasional slopes and curved terrain to have occasional speed moments. Sure, I don't need all of this to enjoy a zone, but this is my preferred level design, and if any of you have played Starlight Zone before, you know that this checks all the boxes. These acts are so good. The platforming is very well paced, the speed sections are so fun and just long enough. You can even extend them if you're good enough at the game, and boy, the exploration and verticality is popping off. The lowest path literally touches the floor, and the highest has you actually go off the screen from the top. I love this zone's level design, and the best part is that the music is somehow even better. The music perfectly encapsulates the feeling of the zone, and the sensation you get from the music is unlike any other song I've ever heard. And the backdrop is breathtaking. Go up to the higher routes to see the beautiful night sky and the glistening blue lit stars. I'll go to the lowest routes to see the construction of buildings, which I personally think are the ones from Springyard. Beautiful visuals, great level design, and the best music I've ever heard. Wow, Krheanos, you say? You're talking about Starlight Zone like it's better than sliced bread. Why do you think it's average? Well, let's talk about that too. Even though I praise the level design a lot, there are still some stuff I really dislike about this level. Remember how I said the lowest path has you touching the floor? Well, that actually damages the level for me. The bottomless pits here are absolutely insane. The level doesn't even warn you about these bottomless pits, and it doesn't seem like they're there. And the platform they put over it isn't fair. Look, I know that putting platforming over bottomless pits is to encourage you that you platform carefully, but sometimes the level just doesn't let you know that you're about to have some extremely heavy platforming from a burst of speed. You can literally just fling yourself off the map because you're going too fast. If you truly want to enjoy Starlight Zone, then I suggest you take the top route. But that brings me to another huge problem with this level. Introducing an enemy worse than caterpillars, worse than buzz bombers, and yes, worse than the rollers in Springyard, we have the bombers. These guys blow up after they detect you, and for some reason, the developers decide to spam the crap out of them in some places where they can't be avoided. And the worst part about it is that you can't kill them at all. Remember all the way back in my Labyrinth video where I said this? To me, if you miss a Chaos Emerald maybe in Springyard or Marble Zone, don't try and get it in Labyrinth Zone. Do it in Starlight, although that's also unfairly difficult in some places. Well, this is exactly what I was talking about. The places they put these enemies are even more inconvenient than Marble Zone's caterkillers, and overall, this level suffers heavily from it. You may have noticed that there's one thing I always talk about that I haven't mentioned yet, and that's the boss fight, and that's because I was so torn on it. For Sonic 1 standards, this is a good boss fight. You have to dodge the falling spike balls and launch yourself or the balls back into your Robotnik. It isn't bad at all, it's just that you were simply waiting for another spike ball to fall to attack him. But in the end, if I had to choose, I'd say it's just a bit more good than bad, not because of its quality, but just because of the fact that almost every other boss in the game isn't that good. In conclusion, the music, background, and the level design at its core are spectacular. But the infuriating and annoying enemy placements, the constant bottomless pits, and the even more constant objects that you have absolutely hope of ever knowing are there, and the above average boss are what makes me truly think that Starlight Zone is just average. Scrap Brain Zone sucks. Yeah, I'm already there. I'll say it again, and it could be my last words. I hate this zone. I wish this never existed. I really hate it. And I wished I realized sooner so I could share to you all that Scrap Brain Zone is so bad that Sonic 1 isn't worth it. Yeah. Getting game overs through Labyrinth Zone and getting through all of it isn't worth it because in the end, Scrap Brain Zone is so bad. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we already know where this is going. My Springyard video is now outdated. In my opinion, I couldn't consider this the worst zone in the classic Sonic games. Sonic City is confusing, and Sonic 2 is boring in my opinion, but this level is the bane of my existence. It's just bad. And you'll see why. But first, let's talk about the literal only good things about Scrap Brain. Firstly, let's talk about the tail end of the game, which is Final Zone. This boss fight while extremely repetitive and not much to it, is one of the harder final bosses. Sonic CDs is, well, yeah, we already know, and Sonic 2s have a pretty consistent pattern, and while Sonic 3 and Knuckles' case is a completely different setup, Sonic 1's final boss is raw. You have no rings, you need to do 8 hits, dodging obstacles and reacting accordingly. It's a surprisingly average boss fight for such a boring sounding concept. And yeah, it's quite okay. It's not good, Sonic Mania definitely has the most cinematic final fight of all the classic Sonic games, but it's held up enough for me not to call it bad. And the last thing I have for good things about this level that quite literally scraps my brain of all good things in life is surprisingly the look of the level. Not the actual level, mind you, that looks absolutely disgusting and lacks any detail. It's so plain yet complicated. I'm actually talking about the background. One thing I wish the other classic Sonic games did is actually show Eggman's lair. Think about it, you're always just inside the base, infiltrating it. We never get to see Sonic actually get into the lair to face off Eggman. And Scrap Brain surprisingly does. It's actually quite nice to see how threatening Eggman actually is. Plenty of industrial buildings are seen, and there's spraying pollution in the air showing how Eggman really is a threat to South Island. And it's far better than what we would have gotten if clockwork had been a thing. And now that I'm done being nice to this disgusting disgrace of a final act of a game, let's tear it down. Now, I'm not gonna start screaming in my microphone, but I will actually show you why I think this zone is the worst zone by far. What's the worst thing I mentioned about Starlight? Unfair level design and the bombers. Guess who's in Scrap Brain, guys? Plastered even more, and while yes, you can walk away from them so it doesn't explode, it does work in Sonic 1 Forever, most of the time, it doesn't work. And boy, about unfair level design. Have you seen the fire pillars, the crushing walls, the saws, the flooring floors, and the freaking bottomless pits? This isn't hard, this is bad. Same problem with Starlight Zone, amplified. What's my main problem with Labyrinth Zone? A level I like. The boss fight not having enough rings and being unfun because of it, and the insufferable unfair placement of obstacles you have to know that are there in order to avoid losing your rings, paired with the horrible accessibility. Now firstly, you can't even get social stage rings in Zap Brain, so that's out of the question. Now let me ask you another question. What do you generally think of when you're told to think of bad obstacles in Labyrinth Zone? Well, obviously there are many different answers from bad nicks to objects, but for many, the spike chain ball thingy are definitely top contenders. Let's go to another video of mine. What's my main problem with Springyard Zone? My former least favorite zone in Sonic 1. It's the horrible music, the extremely slow level design, and the boss. Of course, we're ignoring the boss here, but just listen to this. Anyone actually like this? And hey, I'll give credit where it's due, it does fit the theme of the zone. But hey, most of the 2000s music from Sonic Adventure to Sonic Unleashed does too, and I think most of it sounds like absolute dog water, except for my one and only the level design sucks. I hate this type of design. Spamming objects like we're trying to make every section take 30 seconds long. Now, what if I told you a secret? And trust me, this is really annoying. What if I told you that having the worst part of Marble Zone, Starlight Zone, Springyard Zone, and Labyrinth Zone in one level for difficulty doesn't make it fun and interesting to play, and makes it unfavorable? That's the secret, guys. I'm sure no one else has ever come to the delusion that bad and bad don't make good. You know what? I'm done.
Wait, this is the secret video. Yeah, I know people don't usually put the secret video this early into, well, the video, but you can blame the fact that this is the best place to put it. When reviewing all my footage, I realized I never actually reviewed the Sonic 1 special stages, and here they are. So, what do I think of the Sonic 1 special stages? Well, what do you expect? It's horrible. The fact of the matter is that even if this is a special stage that has a very weird property where you end up getting used to it and practically never fail it, it still doesn't differ from itself at all, not even in difficulty. I'd reckon Sonic 4 special stages are better because of the better controls. That's it. That's the whole secret video. Make sure to subscribe, and let's get back to the compilation. Throughout my Sonic reviews that I've made, one thing stands true for each and every one of them. Although the majority of the zones in the review will be negative, There's never been a game that has no good zone whatsoever. That's still not the case, but it definitely isn't the polar opposite either. Sonic CD was, and still is, the undisputed, unchanging worst game within the tetralogy. And with the entrance of Sonic Superstars in 2023, that unfortunately didn't change. Everything about the game is just so different from the main 3 games in classic Sonic. The title, the level design, even simple game structure like having Act 3 be a boss act. It's all so unfamiliar and not in a good way. From the weird time traveling gimmick to the utter disregarding of what Sonic 1 had set down in terms of gameplay, allow me to explain why exactly I hate Sonic CD. Starting us off, we have Palm Tree Panic. It certainly is a place of palm trees and a social panic since the game has started and it won't be ending for a while. Seriously though, I don't have much of a problem when it comes to Palm Tree Panic. The exploration scene in the zone is fantastic if you're trying to take it slow, and if you're attempting to reach breakneck speeds, then each and every one of the acts has a speed tree monitor at the start. It's honestly a good start to Sonic CD in most regards. Yes, the enemies can be especially annoying if you do decide to go at a faster rate, and the butterflies can blend in with the background, but if we're talking level design, gimmicks, music, and overall quality, Palm Tree Panic is hands down one of the best zones in Sonic CD. That is until we get to the horrible boss fight. Sonic CD is infamous for its very unusual boss fights, but this one in particular has to be one of the worst boss fights that is generally known. You have space behind it, the ability to 3-shot it even though it's not a mini-boss, and all in all, there's not much to be said about it. It's just a horrible boss with an ugly design. Well, I mean, at least in the case of Sonic 2, the grace period was up until Aquatic Ruin. But in this game's case, there's no soothing beginning period, because after a pretty decently designed level, and an admittedly not so great boss fight, we go straight into one of the most poorly designed levels I've ever seen executed. Sure, the background is very pleasing, especially how vibrant the future looks, and the music isn't anything I'd say is bad, but on the other hand, the level design in this zone is absolutely abysmal, no matter which way you put it. At random sections of the level, there'll be huge areas which are completely empty except they actually aren't empty and are filled to the brim with what I can only describe as one-time spring yard bumpers. And yes, this does make them less annoying to deal with, however it balances out with the quantity of these stupid things that halt movement. So much so that you literally can't think of Collision Chaos without this horrible gimmick in mind. And even so, that's not where the horrors end. When you combine this already bad mechanics with extreme open level design, so much so that falling from the top to the bottom is a possibility, with somehow still being able to get stuck in areas like this one area with a time sign in a loop, extremely heard of asset users like bumpers being all over the ground towards the end of blacks, annoying enemies who blend into the background considering this level also loves to launch into orbit without much warning, and some stupid level design choices outright, like putting spike balls that rotate next to enemies that shoot at you, you can see why things aren't all too good for Sonic CD. And to conclude a horrible level, why not use a very horrible boss? This Sonic Spinball clone needs to be studied because the boss itself has nothing to do with skill. Half the time you're just trying your absolute best to try and not fall to the bottom and use the bumpers properly, which is nigh impossible. And after you finally get up to him, he doesn't even put up a fight. You just hit him 3 times and it's over. Moving on from Collision Chaos being, well, a chaos of collisions, we're moving on to the water level in Sonic CD. And unfortunately, this zone doesn't get to join in with all the good water levels from the classic Sonic games. Oops, wrong music, let me change that. And hey, if you know anything about me and my channel, you'll know I have a soft spot for water levels when it comes to classic Sonic. I mean, in my opinion, Hydro City is literally the best zone in Sonic 3, and I'm quite well known for being the one guy who likes Labyrinth Zone. But this zone doesn't get the same treatment, because it has all the bad aspects of every water level we've reviewed so far. It's very slow and also extremely confusing, often having you restart entire sections over again because you missed a jump, or having you do things over and over again if you don't know what you're doing. When you combine that with not having a clue on why some certain sections are completely cut off even though you think that's the only logical way for you to go, and the extremely annoying enemies that shoot out literal pixels for attacks, you have the worst case scenario. And it doesn't get all too much better after reaching the boss. To begin, you start chasing this guy around the level where you either kill him or just let him run, and it's not necessarily a bad addition, but I've always seen it as irritating because there's no real reason for it to be there other than to show off how odd Eggman looks in this game. And the boss fight itself is absolute bonkers. Look, I'll always criticize boss fights if water has anything to do with them, because there really isn't a need for it in that section of a zone. And looking at Tidal Tempest and the way the boss works, it doesn't really take much to understand that I don't like this boss. Now I will say that the boss is definitely better than the horrible excuse for a boss in Palm Tree Panic, and the frustratingly hard pinball based one in Collision Chaos, but it definitely isn't winning any rewards either, because it's not being offensive but not trying to be better. Alright, next off we have a sort of pit stop before things get ugly again. Pause Quadrant, the 4th zone in Sonic CD, is genuinely one of the better applications of Sonic CD's exploration. Where past and future signs can be found relatively easy, and the main focus of exploration isn't just for them. Yes, there still are some glaring issues like some random sections that have no purpose for a conveyor belt, but some applications are very innovative. Next up is something I've actually talked about way back in my Sonic 1 review. It's the stunning visuals that the zone has. The underground area at the beginning of Act 1 is one of the most memorable sections of the zone, and the outside looks even better. Surprisingly though, none of the features look visually appealing. The enemies on the floor are especially annoying however, with some slowing you down, but it's nothing you can't avoid with proper knowledge, and it really isn't a bad thing to have. And the music is one of the best in the game, being very recognizable and having a great entrance into the main part of the song. So overall, Pulse Quadrant being the 2 acts are good. Problems, but that's expected and they aren't overwhelming. But sadly, the zone just had to conclude with a boss that does nothing. You can't hit the boss, all you do is run and dodge obstacles, and at the end of the day, you aren't even the one to beat him, his stupid machine just overheats. Truly one of the worst bosses in classic Sonic, and the only reason why it isn't just the worst is because there are some later boss fights in the game that are completely bad and significantly important. And we're already back to absolute terror, and oh my goodness. After all of this time, I've finally gotten to talk about the zone again after the last time I did over 10 months ago on the Blue Blur, my older channel. And I have to say, with no doubt in my mind whatsoever, that Wacky Workbench is one of the worst things I have ever played. The entire gimmick of the level is that you need to get to the bottom of the level while avoiding the plenty floors that cover up the floor. The only real platforming you need to do is at the very top of the level, and you can fall a very long way down. The main problem I have with the zone is that it changes up the main formula of Sonic so much that it becomes horrible. Like, seriously? This zone gets very frustrating with its electric machines, and the gameplay is absolutely horrendous. I don't have a problem with innovations on the classic Sonic formula, as long as it has the main components any other Sonic zone would have, but I feel like Sonic City's worst zone in the game is just a bad idea brought to life when thinking of a gimmick. But despite that, there is a redeeming factor that doesn't make the zone completely horrible, and it's the boss fight. For the majority of Sonic CD, good boss fights aren't easy to come by. I mean, look at the last one. But while it definitely isn't anything crazy, it doesn't exactly have any glaring issues, and the whole thing with pressing blocks was always pretty cool to me. Surely the best zone in the game wouldn't come right after the worst one, right? Like seriously, like there's no way.
Bruh.
Fortunately, the penultimate zone in Sonic CD is genuinely one of the unexpectedly best zones I've ever played, not being limited to just Sonic CD. To start off, the level design doesn't have the problem most zones in Sonic CD have, and it's a good level. But to be completely honest, there are glaring problems with the level design, so it's not perfect, or even great. For example, the extremely maze-like portions where you need to navigate your way through tubes that have you make split-second decisions. These make exploring the zone a lot more tedious than in other zones because you need to memorize a certain route just to see another part of the level, and basically anything that can hurt you in any way isn't done correctly. This applies not only to the enemies either, the blue spike balls are a nuisance. But other than that, there aren't any problems with the level design. It's very fast and just open enough, so a lot of the time you'll bounce through the air, and mostly not worry about having an unseeable obstacle get in your way. Aside from having good level design in general, Stardust Speedway is also known for having the best music in the entirety of Sonic CD. To say that is really tough, considering when we're talking about Sonic CD from a wider scope and perspective, the main thing Sonic CD actually has going for it that is very solid is its soundtrack. I don't even need to say anything at all. Sure, the present track is the worst of them all, but it's still extremely good. Plus, that doesn't matter because the bad feature is peak music from this game. But unfortunately, we have to end off the best zone in the game with the best boss in the game? Yeah, Metal Sonic is so creative, and at the same time, you're not flabbergasted and shocked when the boss first starts. I mean, Sonic is known for his speed, and there's a metal version of Sonic. The only real way to test who's better would just be a race. And just like any metal version would, Metal Sonic doesn't exactly play the fairs, seeing as how you can't disrupt him but he disrupts you. It's very expected once you see it, it's so unexpected before you see it, and I love it. The race isn't linear either. There are branching pathways and areas you can use to collect rings to stay alive for a price of some time. I used to think the game would be a bit lenient on you, but no. You've got to prioritize your speed over your health because Eggman has an instant death there and a few mistakes could seriously trip you up. All in all, a combination of good level design, banger music, and one of the most memorable boss fights in the series makes Stardust Speedway the undoubted best zone in the game. Alright, the fight with the guy on the box art of the game, and one of the two things taken from the game wasn't the final fight to the game, even though we saved Amy at the end, making the goal already accomplished. This game is weird. Metallic Madness, the actual final zone in Sonic CD, isn't really doing anything to make Sonic CD end off on a good note. But to be completely fair, the music in the zone is of the better tracks in the game. So much so that when comparing the Mania remix of Stardust Speedway to the track of Metallic Madness wins very easily, even in both acts because it's that good of a song. But for Sonic CD, it stays in second place, which again isn't a bad thing by any means. However, that's about where the pleasantries end with the zone because the level design doesn't continue with the philosophy of Stardust Speedway's more speed-focused level design, but rather leans back towards the maze-like levels like Collision Chaos and Tidal Tempest have. And it makes exploration not a viable thing to do. Having mini sections where your character becomes very tiny is a very cool gimmick, but aside from having smaller entrances to areas where you can only access using the leader that shrinks you, no real gimmicks are made using this. And the worst part is, this isn't even the worst part of the zone. The absolute worst part of the zone, heck, the whole game, is Metallic Madness's boss, because of the sheer amount of disappointment this presents. First of all, the Act 3 portion of the final act is especially frustrating, considering this one is the only one that you can not only get crushed in, but there's also a bottomless pit, something not very common in Sonic CD. I get that it's the final act of the final zone and it's supposed to be difficult, but the combination of bumpers, platformers that spin around, and springs are extremely messy, and there really isn't much anyone can say about that. Next up, we have the Stardust Speedway Firefly mini-boss, and it's okay. Not anything crazy, but considering nobody who saw this for the first time was expecting it, and there's nothing really all that bad about it, I'll let it pass. But the main boss is the worst part of the game, and one of the most objective things that people can't defend when talking about Sonic CD as a whole. Sonic 1's final boss was average, the boss fight itself wasn't challenging, but having no rings and the amazing music balanced it out just a bit. Sonic 2's final boss was just a final boss, difficult turned easy after finding a reliable pattern, so it's just average as well. Sonic 3 and Knuckles' final fight was bad for the first section and good for the second section, and with amazing visuals and the good music, it's pretty good. But Sonic CD has the worst final boss I've reviewed yet, and it isn't even close. Firstly, the boss doesn't look cool at all, losing any visual appeal whatsoever. The atmosphere doesn't fit with the dramatic music, and you know what the dramatic fuses doesn't fit with either? Yeah, the fact that the boss takes 4 hits. To put how foolish this is into perspective, a mini-boss from Sonic 3 and Knuckles takes most of the time 5 hits to beat, and every normal boss takes 8. This boss, not a mini-boss, isn't just any boss, no. This is supposed to be the final boss in the entire game, and it takes less hits to beat than Fire Breath from Angel Island. When you combine this with the fact that even though the boss doesn't have health, it's really annoying to fight, and there was supposed to be a secret final boss that you can only get after collecting all the 7 time stones, we can see why this is such a bad thing for the zone. And finally, the last thing I have to talk about, and also the last thing that Sonic CD has that unexpectedly is one of the best implementations of it in the Sonic formula, it's the Sonic CD special stages. To access the special stages in the game, you have to reach the end of Act 1 or Act 2 with 50 rings, and afterwards a giant ring will appear. It's exactly like Sonic 1 in that regard, and there really shouldn't be too much of a problem to get it in every act. After you get into the giant ring, you enter a pseudo 3D space where you need to pop 6 UFOs to acquire the time stone. Different UFOs have different drops, and there's even a time UFO that spawns in if you're at 20 seconds or lower. And honestly, it is extremely fun to play. The main structure is super simple, but it comes together to make a very good special stage that's possible for me to play for fun. One major thing it does wrong, however, is its difficulty. For the first 4 stages, the difficulty gradually increases, but afterwards, the idea of making it harder is just having the UFOs move unexpectedly. And of course, like most special stages, the 6th one is way harder than any other one. But other than that, Sonic City's special stages are overall great, being debatably the best special stage from the classic Sonic games.
If you've been on this channel throughout the better half of last month, then it should be pretty obvious to you that I do not hold Sonic the Hedgehog 2 in high regard like everyone else does. It goes without saying that I prefer Sonic 1, and I cannot, for the life of me, understand why people would prefer this over Sonic 3 and Knuckles. You know, the pinnacle of 2D Sonic. So, how does this all happen? Why don't I like the critically acclaimed Sonic 2, which to this very day is credited as one of the best sequels of all time? Well, let's find out. Hey, I'm not gonna be unfair to the game. I'm not only gonna mention the bad stuff about the game and write off the actually good stuff as inoffensive. Because if you know the way Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was developed, you'd at least call it mediocre because of that alone. Supposedly a part of Sega of Japan went to Sega of America because of tensions with the Sega Saturn at 32X? I don't know. So we have people who can speak English, half that can speak Japanese, so communication was absolutely terrible. They only had a year to make the game too. With Sega of America developing Sonic CD, and with their current state, it's a miracle that this game came out not bad, especially as fast as it happened. So yes, for what it's worth, Sonic 2 is a very impressive game. Is it good though? I wouldn't say so. Emerald Hill Zone. A good start to a bad game. I don't know, it just always seems that really bad games in this franchise tend to bait you with good zones. The minute Emerald Hill Zone and Chemical Plant is over, they're all horrible, either unfair or unfun, and overall just an unpleasant experience. Kinda like City Escape.
FBI, open up!
Sonic Adventure 2 opinions aside, I still think that there are flaws to this zone, and even though some people consider it to be the best opening in the trilogy, I mean blatantly, that just isn't true. I would reckon that Sonic CDs is even better than Sonic 2's because of the introductions of the game's level design, mechanic, and time travel all being pretty well made, despite the fact that, you know, I don't like that game. And I'm sure no one's gonna be surprised when I say that in my opinion it's Sonic 3's Angel Island, but let's not get distracted. Overall good zones, at least in the context of Sonic 2, not the best zone. So it's just shy of being considered good. Next up is Chemical Plant Zone. Again, not a bad zone, but it's not a fun one either. Firstly, I want to clear up by saying no, Chemical Plant Zone does not sound like a top 10 Sonic OST piece. I'm sorry, but I just don't see how it sounds that good. It's definitely not good enough for me to be listening to in my free time, and that's what I consider a good Sonic soundtrack. Yeah, I'm just one for hot takes, aren't I? But seriously though, the gameplay is okay in this zone. You're getting crushed by things that really aren't your fault, or mindlessly running through downward-facing diagonal ways, going so fast that you leave the screen, only to get hit by some unseeable enemy. But some of the speed sections and the platforming are quite enjoyable. So yeah, pretty average level overall. Hey, how's the boss doing in this zone? Oh yeah, bro, I don't know, bro. Maybe I'm even giving these levels too much credit. Next up is Aquatic Ruin, which is where I really start disliking this game. At least Emerald Hill and Chemical Plant were at worst offensive, but Aquatic Ruin is really where this game really starts getting me frustrated. In this level, there's water, which if you know me, isn't a problem. Heck, I like Labyrinth Zone. But where it becomes a problem is if you have no way of telling where these stupid mosquitoes or grounders have no indication of where they're gonna pop out. It's come to the point that I literally roll into a ball all the time. Like, why should I even have to compromise anything for a zone to not be insufferable? Not bad, but it's just annoying. At least the boss isn't bad though, so there's that. Overall, it's a bad zone, but not really, bad.
Well, can't say I didn't expect this. It feels like Aquatic Ruin really is a transition stage, because after a pretty decent boss fight, this game plunges you into the most boring, the most repetitive, the most ear-splitting, and the most degrading set of levels I have ever seen. And this is why, despite me hating Scrap Brain even more than these next 4 or so levels, I'd rather play Sonic 1. Think about it like this: I'd rather have 8 A's and 1 F than 5 A's and 4 B's. So let's get this over with, because I'm not really jumping with jolly joy to talk about these levels. So, Casino Night Zone. You know, this level is interesting because this level actually doesn't have any redeeming qualities. Like, the music is horrible, the boss fight is abysmal, and you do not want me to get started on the gameplay. Seriously though, simply accidentally landing onto a spring and holding the A button for a whole 5 seconds, just waiting for something to happen, only for you to miss the ledge by an inch and roll right back into the spring doing everything all over, it's just infuriating. Bouncing around with the pinball bouncers sounds fun, but it really isn't at all. And it's not like you're listening to good music while you're suffering. And the absolute worst part about this asinine music is that the player 2 music for the same zone is so much better. Take a listen. See? Anyways, a really bad level that's unenjoyable and overall unfavorable. Next up on our tour of disgusting vile levels, we have Hilltop. You know, Emerald Hill's older brother who made it all high in life, but the actual key for his success was just because he copied his younger brother. And yes, classic Sonic the Hedgehog, I know Hilltop Zone is probably a future version of Emerald Hill. But first of all, I think that excuse doesn't justify the fact that the only thing changed is the color of the ground. Not even the grass is touched or anything really. Something Sonic CD, you know, the time travel game, does. And secondly, you mean to tell me out of Wood Zone, Cyber City Zone, and all the other zones that were deleted from Sonic 2, the only one they made a future version for was the Emerald Hill, and when they decided to scrap all the zones, they kept this one? Okay, whatever. Defend the copied level aesthetic. What you can't defend is the one thing that stays with you throughout the whole zone, and it has to be one of the most horrendous pieces of anything my body has sensed. I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but goddamn, the music in this zone is atrocious. I don't care if you love Sonic 2, or if you think it's the best game to ever exist, or anything else. I think it can be confirmed here, this music is the absolute worst. Forget boring like Metropolis, Marble Garden, Death Egg, this is straight bad music. And what makes this even worse is that the zone's gameplay isn't half bad. I love the parkour section with the rising lava. Sure, overground ain't that good, pretty boring, but the level design underground is really fun and enjoyable. Just wish the audio didn't bug out. Only seems to happen in this level too, which is quite weird. Overall, I think the zone is quite literally better on mute. Hey, what's this? Bit of actually good gameplay? Banger music and somewhat annoying yet somewhat challenging boss fight? That's right, it's Mystic Cave Zone, the breath of fresh air. Certainly not at the same level of enjoyment as Emerald Hill and Chemical Plant, but definitely better than the 5 or so zones that came before it. Sure, the occasional buzz light thingy can be extremely annoying since you can't even avoid it, and those enemies shoot out of the wall without much warning, but overall, the level design is well crafted, and putting stuff to open contraptions is a nice gimmick. And that's not to mention the beautiful aesthetic and the really nice music. It ain't anything exceptional, no, not even great, but it really is a nice breath of fresh air from a whole list of god-awful and downright horrendous zones. You know what? Maybe the first half of the game is why I don't like this game so much. Oh well, it's nice to see that things are only going up from here. Oh no. Oh no, please. I can't. No, please, no! Welcome, my friends, to the worst zone in the game. Oil Ocean Zone truly is a testament to how bad this game really gets. Although the gameplay, boss fight, and gimmicks suck, it truly is a shame because the music in this zone rocks. I love it, and it perfectly fits in with the level. The problem with it is the level itself, like I said. I don't understand. It's just the most infuriating thing ever, and somehow, Act 2 gets even worse. This is the most frustrating, consistently bad experience with the zone I've ever had. From the first time I played the game in 2019 to writing down the script right now, this zone has always been one of the least recommendable zones in my opinion. Very bad level with anything bad to say. The enemies are annoying, the level design is annoying, the bot is yet again another jump once and maintain your balance and boom, you beat it. You know what? Please, let's just move on. I'd really rather not talk about this godforsaken level. Now this level Metropolis Zone has done a complete 180 in my eyes. In my Green Hill Zone video, I quite literally put this level up with Hydro City, Angel Island, and Wing Fortress.
But if you want to compare it to the levels like Metropolis Zone, Wing Fortress Zone, Hydro City, or Angel Island, yeah, no. Those levels have a perfect mix between platforming and speed with a hint of exploration so you can find stuff you never found before.
But after playing the level again, yeah, I'd have to say it's pretty obvious that this zone is really bad. Firstly, I don't even need to say this, but why on earth are there 3 acts? Like, I know Perfect over here is shouting at me telling me that I should like 3 acts because, you know, I like Sonic 1 so much. But the problem is Metropolis' acts are all long, confusing stretches to the end of the zone. And no, you can't say the same about Labyrinth Zone, because even if it was incredibly slow, the pathway is always clear and up ahead. But in Metropolis Zone, there's so many times where you could get stuck in the loop over and over, which really makes the zone very frustrating to play. And that's not even accounting the fabled enemies, the Asteron slicers, and the stupid crabs that just make me experience this level even worse. Honestly, it's a miracle I even liked this zone before, which I didn't even know was possible now that I look back at it. Even the music, something that I've mentioned before in my Labyrinth video, sounds like something straight out of a freaking Cam 18 video.
What's the rarest block in Minecraft? Well, actually, it's a really hard question to solve, even though I've said it over and over and over again. But I think I've finally found the answer. The answer to the rarest block in Minecraft is your dad, because he left your house and is never coming back with any milk or any kind of liquid at all.
No offense to Cam of course, but still, this is boring, repetitive, and non-interesting music. And the boss, I mean, it's okay. You can't just spam it to death, but it's not anything amazing. Okay, finally, we're at the end game. First off, we have Sky Chase. Honestly, even though a lot of people have serious problems with this zone, with it being an auto-scroller and that it stops the pacing, which is true, but in my opinion, Sonic 2 is too fast. Having this kind of break time from blatantly holding right and either simply waiting for something to happen, but getting interrupted rudely by some unseeable enemy, is nice. This level can be a doozy. I'm not even calling it a good zone on its own, but its placement is perfect and the music is, well,
Bruh.
oh my. Now this is my favorite zone in the game. Wing Fortress is absolutely the shining island in this ocean of bad zones, bad music, and bad boss fights. The opening is unlike any other thing from the classic Sonic games, and Sonic hops aboard the Wing Fortress. This level checks all of my checks for a good level: platform heavy, exploration, verticality, and curved terrain. I really don't understand why people have problems with Wing Fortress. Everyone just either complains about the good platforming or doesn't bother and skips half the level, which I definitely never ever did throughout the course of playing Sonic 2. Either way, this level is amazing, and the boss is one of the best as well. It's challenging, but not downright frustrating. It's the second to last zone of the game. I don't expect the Emerald Hill Zone boss fight difficulty. And lastly, we have the Death Egg, the big bad final boss. Back in 2019, when I first reached Death Egg, I was so relieved because Wing Fortress was really the most annoying level ever, and Death Egg really didn't hold back. I'm not joking when I tell you that this level completely beat me up. For hours each day, I'd get game over after game over, playing it again and again. This boss zone was at first seen by me, and probably many others, as a horrible, unfair end to the game. But retrospectively, this stuff's easy. Like, all you need to do is a simple cycle to damage the Death Egg without taking harm, and you can beat Death Egg in like 2 minutes. I don't hate the zone, I don't like it either. It's just a level that when I beat, I immediately turn off the game to skip the credits and go to bed, because playing Sonic 2 in my opinion, is just really tiring. Like, playing the game, like, it's fun in the beginning, then it gets worse, and then by the time you're done playing Death Egg, you've been through a lot, so you just turn off the thing, you just go, because Sonic 2, it's a very demanding game on your mental health. Well, hey, we still aren't done yet. I present to you the only consistent thing to come out of Sonic 2. Both figuratively and literally, it's the special stages. In every zone except Sky Chase and Death Egg, you need to collect 50 rings and then proceed to reach a checkpoint. Once you touch a checkpoint, every other checkpoint before it and the checkpoint itself will be selected. So, not off to a great start, it's rather an annoying way to enter a special stage. But since I played on the 2013 version, when I actually realized the pressure stages were just half pipe, it wasn't half bad. It's quite repetitive, sure, but it's not like a criminal offense or anything. Oh, yeah, you're right, this is horrible. I mean, just look at this. The render distance is abysmal. Tails as well, Tails, and the bombs show up completely unannounced. Sure, I get the fact that it was in fact 1992, but for the love of God, no, this is horrible. Even Sonic CD did it better, and that's the first and last time you'll be hearing me praise Sonic CD's gameplay. When Matt Has No Cuts brought up the special stages in his Sonic 2 video, you know, the thing that was meant to be a love letter to the game, even he hated the special stages. Just goes to show that no one likes the Sonic 2 special stages. Yeah, this is probably the most rage bait Sonic channel ever. I'm proud of you. I really hope this isn't just a rage bait. I find these takes very interesting. Bro's the embodiment of hot take. Okay, fine. Whatever. Hot take this, hot take that. I can agree that maybe my videos get more views because they're unpopular opinions, but what I will not agree on is that my videos are rage bait. They're not. The effects of rage bait might apply, but I'm not trying to make rage bait content. And this video is proof. How's about this for a hot take? Yeah, this is ice cold. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is my favorite 2D Sonic game. Yeah, I know, so unoriginal. Everybody loves this game, and for good reason too. Just by booting it up, the game looks so good and the feel the game gives you is amazing. From the upbeat music to the beautiful visuals, this game really is the better sequel. Yeah, I said it. Now put your pitchforks down, you all know it's true. Yep, drop them all on the floor. Yeah, that's what I thought. After the events of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, the Death Egg lands on Angel Island. This causes the island to fall down from the sky and crash into the ocean. Apparently, according to Origins, Eggman landed in the Hidden Palace Zone, which kinda makes sense considering Eggman knowing about the Master Emerald, presumably having the Death Egg landing in Lava Reef, and meeting up with Knuckles, but at the end of Sonic 2's good ending, you know, the canon one, we can very clearly see Eggman stomping his feet next to the Death Egg robot in a bush. Hey, storytellers, you kinda missed that. Basically, Eggman convinces Knuckles that Sonic and Tails are coming for the Master Emerald and basically that they're bad guys. Knuckles, who has had no interaction, and Eggman using the point that Sonic had the Chaos Emerald as proof, Knuckles trusts him. So immediately after Sonic 2, or maybe not immediately after Sonic 2 because they really got the goofy rocket thing back on, they send some type of energy from Angel Island, so they check it out. Sonic decides to actually be smart about landing on an unknown island by turning super, but it turns out that in-game mechanics do match up with the narrative. As such, Sonic and Tails head into Angel Island, trying to get the Chaos Emeralds back from him. And honestly, the way they introduce Knuckles in this game speaks volumes about his character. My guy literally just shows up from under the ground, takes a god out of his divinity, takes all his gems, and just emotes on the dude and leaves. Knuckles knows the island better than anyone, and he's pretty confident and cocky to pull a stunt like that. Too bad the fabled cross-bearer of Sonic the Hedgehog became the mayor of Stupidville, or whatever they called it 21 years later.
Approved.
That's all we got in the story for now.
but we will get back to it later. Angel Island Zone is, in my opinion, perfect opening to the perfect 2D Sonic game. It has everything from beautiful scenery and visuals, amazing level design, midway changes, and so much more that really makes you want to play more of this game. It just seems to do everything so properly and so effectively that it makes people want to give this game an actual chance. So, let's talk about it. Like we all know, there is no perfect thing in life. Angel Island is a great opening, but with all my other great zones I've reviewed, I do have my pet peeves with the zone. Firstly, crazily enough, we're going to talk about the boss fight. The boss fight itself isn't a problem, in fact I think it's great. The real issue I have with this thing is the way the boss itself is set up. There are bottomless pits on each side of the arena, which in itself isn't very big of a problem. Where it does become a problem is when something like this happens.
Bruh.
I had already beaten the boss and was simply trying to get Tails to grab onto me, but instead I used my fire shield and died, starting myself all the way back from the airship section, and this can be extremely annoying really quickly. And this leads me to another huge problem I have with Angel Island. The cutscenes they have are pretty cool, but the problem with them is like some other cutscenes, like Sonic Frontiers, they are way too long. You probably don't understand what exactly I mean, or how bad it is, so let me show you. First off, when you start playing Angel Island, the opening cutscene takes a whole 23 seconds to finish. Sure, the first time you're playing the game it isn't anything terrible, but for someone like me who has played this zone more times than everyone else I've ever known combined, this cutscene is a drag. Thank God Kekavision has the backspace feature which speeds up your gameplay, and also Sonic 3 aired for just being able to skip the cutscene altogether. And then, once you get up the huge tree, another 13 seconds are taken for the first Fire Breath cutscene, being almost 34 seconds. And then, for Act 2, the airstrike takes a whole nother 32 seconds. That's a whole minute of doing absolutely nothing. And once you add the fact that dying like the way I did after the boss fight, that's another 32 seconds of holding right and doing nothing. So yes, while Angel Island is a great opening to the pinnacle of 2D Sonic, it's definitely not perfect. That being said, here's everything I absolutely love about this zone. Now that the bad stuff is out of the way, I can gush about how much I love this level. Firstly, the visuals are amazing. Sonic 3 obviously stepped up the visual appeal of the classic Sonic games by a lot, from saturation, elements, backgrounds, details, and more, but wow! Angel Island is a beautiful setting. Lush jungle trees with a glistening sea in the background. Sonic 3's aesthetic is amazing, and this level is a prime example. Next, we have the immaculate level design. I've said it once and I'll say it again. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is the best of all the other classic Sonic games put together. Sonic 1's strength isn't exactly speedy sections, it's more platforming. Sonic CD's is exploration, and Sonic 2 is for its speed. Sonic 3 somehow manages not only to have its own well-made level design, for the most part, but it also manages to take all the good parts from the past games and make itself a masterpiece. And Angel Island has cemented itself to be one of the best classic Sonic zones in terms of level design. The different routes are amazing, and blasting through isn't a problem either. Like, for example, did you know that on the top route of the beginning of Act 1, there's a secret area with a ring box only accessible to Tails or Sonic and Tails? And in Act 2, there's a whole different section for the draining water section that you can take using a bubble shield or Tails. There's a whole bunch of rings, flame shields, and even a lightning one too. And if you decide not to go to the upper path, the lower path is split into two paths, one going underwater. Honestly, this is how level design should be made. And the thing is, just because the exploration and replayability value of Angel Island is immensely high, doesn't mean that the speed factor has been let down either. Zooming through these levels is a very plausible method to play Sonic 3. Sometimes you just want to take your time and see what the level has to offer, and sometimes you just want to grab a speed shoes monitor and blast through the levels at blistering speeds. It's the perfect balance between the regurgitating Sonic CD fans and the screaming Sonic 2 fans. Furthermore, I want to talk about the bosses. The mini-boss isn't anything Oh, wait, it's already done? Yeah, this game doesn't have the best introduction to mini-bosses. Putting a flame shield monitor right before you fight a boss whose main attack is fire isn't very different from putting an invincibility monitor right before a boss fight Green Hill style. And even without the flame shield, nudging yourself into the back of the fire breath to kill it effortlessly isn't exactly hard to do. but the main boss is perfect. The difficulty of the boss is perfect, and the way he shows up from behind the trees at first really does add to the tension. Again, putting a fire shield right before the boss that only attacks with fire isn't exactly a smart decision, but at least this time it's possible to lose in the air striking cutscene. And beating the boss with the fire shield isn't exactly a good idea, as we've seen. And lastly, something that I wasn't exactly sure on placing, it's the music of the level. In Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles, there's different music for each act, but they don't differ that much. But in some cases, they completely do. For example, Hydro City Act 1 is leagues behind Act 2 when it comes to music. Also, it does in gameplay as well, but that's not for right now. Angel Island's music isn't bad or average, and it does fit the theme of the level, but it's not anything special. You won't find this level's song in my music playlist, unlike Hydro City Act 2, Ice Cap Act 1, Flying Battery, and Lava Reef. But it's not like some other zones we'll speak of, so I'm not complaining. In conclusion, while the annoying boss fight setup and the long cutscenes can sour the zone, the wonderful level design and fair enemy placement with the beautiful visuals and the nicely done boss fight really make Sonic 3's opening level an amazing experience. Hydro City Zone is a zone that is so well done, it's surprising. Seriously, I thought people didn't like water levels, but when it comes to this zone, people love it so much. And for good reason. The zone does so much right that it really does nail the ideal of the water zone level design. So, let's talk about how Sonic 3's second zone is so good and what it could improve on. Like I've said, nothing in life is perfect. No matter how good you think something is, there will always be an objectively bad problem with that thing. You'll hear me gush on and on about how good Sonic Frontiers is and how it's a masterpiece, but in reality, the long unskippable cutscenes, the log tracking points like the squid chase on Krheanos Island, and the memory tokens collecting on Krheanos aren't all things I hate about the game, and so is with Hydro City. It's not perfect. For example, look, I'm sorry, okay? I looked and I scanned and I tried to criticize this level. I played it over and over, trying to get sick of it. I even got the special stage ring, something I don't do when recording footage. And despite all that, I just can't find anything wrong with Hydro City. I initially had a smaller version of this problem with Angel Island because I saw the problems there. All the problems I had with Angel Island being the long cutscenes and the horrible mini-boss aren't present in Hydro City, and all the advantages of Angel Island are present. So if you're expecting me to talk about how much I hate the zones of Sonic 3, well, just wait a bit, because my god, I have a lot to say about the latter half of the Sonic 3 half. That being said, however, let me tell you why this zone is, well, perfect one. Where do I even start? There's so much this zone manages to execute properly. Firstly, the visuals. If there's one thing I do have to say about Hydro City, it's that in my opinion, the beta Hydro City zone sorta just looks better. That beta background looks amazing. Again, if added into the final game, I would consider it being one of the best backgrounds in all the classic Sonic games. Oh well, I guess I can't have everything. I'm not saying that the backgrounds in the final game is even bad or even decent. It's just that the lighter, more grey palette of the beta version, along with the vegetation, makes me believe that the beta version is better. Next up, we have the music, and oh my god. Unlike Angel Island, which has music I'd only listen to in-game, Hydro City's music is amazing. Act 1 is worse than Act 2's, and I do mean way worse. But Act 1 isn't bad, it's just that Act 2 is the one in my playlist. Either way, these tracks are very good, and I don't have any weird complaints about these tracks. Wow! These two zones' music are very nice and aren't repetitive, boring, and aren't about as empty as my head when I'm trying to learn about history. I sure hope the next zone doesn't do any of that. Next, we have the level design. And frankly, I didn't think I'd like this level design. The level evil seems to go too fast or too slow, and the whole thing doesn't seem like it'd work. But the way the faster and slower sections are made is excellent. I certainly wouldn't say there's a whole lot of exploration to do in this zone other than the giant rings, but I'm not complaining. I mean, look, you can run in the water! And Act 2's level design is even better because all the sections that would have been phase breakers because of the water are able to be sped through, and this act uses sonic momentum perfectly. And the boss fights are also a huge step up from Angel Island. The mini boss can be annoying, especially considering how your speed is gimped from being underwater, but the boss fight involves strategy in that you want to use your insta-shield at the right time, and get out of the water to beat him when he starts to whirlpool because then he isn't spinning, so hitting him is easier, but you gotta be careful not to hit him too fast, or else the robot's invincibility frames would have you go into the robot, using your rings or your shield, and then having whirled anyways. And by the time you can control yourself because of the way you land after the whirlpool phase, he's already in the air. See what I mean? It's quite a simple boss fight, but even then when I beat it in less than 25 seconds, all this is going through my mind. So the mini boss fight is amazing, and the main boss is essentially everything good about the Springyard Zone boss, with none of the bad things. The way you can attack the boss is really thought out, and I get a burst of energy when I get a hit on him. Or, you know, you could just use Super Sonic and have one of the most epic looking boss fights where Sonic just gets stuck in his typhoon, then proceeds to stand on it, harming Eggman's machine without even trying, and beating him in record time. So yes, subjectively, I guess there is something perfect in this game. In conclusion, I love Hydro City Zone. It's my favorite zone in Sonic 3 and Knuckles along with another zone, and it makes Labyrinth Zone cry in the corner with Shen. Sorry Labyrinth Zone, you just can't compare with your younger brother. I don't like this zone. Yeah, not one bit. Believe it or not, despite the title of the review, I actually don't think every single zone in this game is better than sliced bread. And Marble Garden is a prime example. I personally think that this zone is one of the top 3 worst classic Sonic zones. Yeah, that's how bad it is. Took that in with Carnival Dogwater Zone and Scrap My Brain Zone, and we've got ourselves a horrible level to talk about. So for all of you that are waiting for me to start criticizing like crazy, buckle in, because like Angel Island and Hydro City, we're going for 2. Yeah. Like Scrap Brain Zone, despite this level being absolutely horrendous, I still have a good thing to talk about. Yeah, and it's only one thing, that being the background. Not for Act 1, no, that still is a pretty decent background, but it's way too empty. I'm talking about the Act 2 background, with the lush bushes, detailed ancient ruins, and the beautiful mountains in the distance, giving me heavy Marble Zone vibes, which is kind of ironic. Either way, the detail they put into this background is kind of insane. I mean, I honestly don't think I've seen any other background that has so much detail put into one simple structure. Too bad the ground makes you unable to see in the background most of the time, and too bad the ground actually looks disgusting. Yeah, that's it. I do like the background, the settings, and the environment, but really, I know what y'all been waiting for. Let's start yapping. Just like with Hydro City in terms of good stuff, where do I even start here? I guess we should talk about the boss fights since they piss me off the least. The mini boss is a degrading of the Mystic Cave boss, in which it causes stuff to fall from the ceiling, then it comes down where you were when the attack stops. The thing is, stuff like this only really works well for the main boss of the zone, where 8 hits is the amount you need to defeat it. But when the boss is literally waiting for you to show up in hitting range while being a mini boss, it doesn't really make sense. It's really annoying and really pointless, especially since Marble Garden Act 1 lets to absolutely choke you with lightning shields, so the fight goes by even faster. I mean, at that point, you might as well not have a mini boss in the first place. Also, you know, not innovative, copies of they were done before or whatever, so yeah, I don't like it. Next up, the main boss. And this boss actually tries something new. Once you reach the boss, it drills the ground, forcing Tails to carry you. So you basically fight the boss in midair, jumping off Tails to score hits on him. Yeah, too bad the whole gimmick of the whole boss fight is optional. Again, they put the boss just there waiting for you to reach it in hitting range. Seriously, no other boss up to this point has done this, so why? And just like that, you can get 7 out of the 8 hits you need to beat the boss before he even takes off. And even so, the gimmick itself is executed horribly. When Eggman comes from the left or right, it's alright, but from up, down, or diagonally, it is straight up annoying. Imagine if debris were flying from the sky, Sonic having to jump from piece to piece, having to time your jumps to hit Robotnik. That'd be so fun, but no. The boss sucks as well. Alrighty, we have the music, and this track is similar to Angel Island in that the Acts track doesn't really differ that much from the other acts. I'm pretty sure Act 2 is literally just Act 1's track started from a different spot with minor changes, kinda like Ice Cap. That being said, Marble Garden's music is by far the most hyped up thing I've ever put on this channel, having been mentioned ever since my very first video that I made that reached any kind of sort of audience being my Labyrinth Zone video. Sonic CD has the entire US soundtrack, and Sonic 3 has Marble Garden, but it was mentioned in my most popular video, my Sonic 2 review. Heck, it's been mentioned twice in this video already. So, has my opinion changed? Well, after listening to this track while playing the zone, I can say that my opinion has changed by quite a bit. What I once thought was annoying and repetitive has become catchy and nice to listen to. It's done a complete 180 in my eyes. Thank you, thank you. I wouldn't have been able to do it without sarcasm. It's honestly, it's not that much. It was a really hard effort. We did it together, and yeah. So that's why we won. No, but seriously, I've said it way too many times, but for the sake of its own review, I'll say it one last time. This music sucks. It's a bad track that doesn't even fit the level that well, and it's super repetitive. And let me mention that repetitive music isn't necessarily a bad thing. Tracks like the Final Zone and Ice Cap are songs that do repeat, but they sound good. Marble Garden doesn't. So the music sucks too. Lastly, we have the level design, and it is by far the worst part of the level. A vertical level is a bad idea by default, but having it be so confined, with terrible gimmicks like the stupid roller thingies, with impressively annoying spike walls that can insta-kill you, the swinging thing from Labyrinth Zone, but even worse, put at the most unpredictable paces that you would have no chance seeing in, even in a prophecy, with actually purposely unseeable enemies, and face statues that have horrible timing, practically forcing you to get hit. Yeah, I think you can see the problem. Marble Garden tries to innovate with new mechanics, but in the end, all of these gimmicks have very inherent problems. In conclusion, I don't like Marble Garden at all. It's the reason why I don't play Sonic 3 sometimes. I don't actually have anything else to say, and I don't really have a segue either, so let the yapping continue in Carnival Night. Unlike my intro with Marble Garden, I'm not gonna start dogging on Carnival Night. It's been a week since my Marble Garden video was made, and believe it or not, some things have actually changed, but don't worry. I didn't miraculously start thinking of Carnival Night as the best zone in Sonic 3 and Knuckles or anything like that, but my opinion has changed somewhat considerably. But fear not, for a yapping shall ensue. Let's get into it. Like Marble Garden, I only have one good thing to say. But the difference is, unlike the case of Marble Garden where the thing I praised it for was something insignificant being the background, in Carnival Night it's actually something pretty important. And it's the level design? Yeah, I'm not joking. At first, the level design seemed really stupid. Everything bounces you around in one way or another. It seems very dumb of a level to just make you uncontrollably go places you had no intention of going. But the more I played the level, the more I realized it's all about the control you have over the character. When you're in the anti-gravity machine's influence and you keep barging trying to get past, chances are you'll keep repeatedly hitting and getting bounced back by the rotating bumpers. Sometimes you'll even get chain hit by the bumpers, but no matter what, you'll never have a good experience and end up on the short end of the stick. But if you control Sonic and have him move in coordination with the bumpers, then you'll guarantee an inoffensive experience with the bumpers. Now, I'm not saying this level design is great, it's definitely got its problems. For example, you might be able to control yourself with the bumpers, but there's no luck with the pads that always put you on a yellow or red pad, sending you back for no good reason. The barrels aren't a good gimmick at all, and the level just seems to have a thing for crushing you. Spikes you would have never seen coming from the ceiling, the barrels are almost always a crushing hazard, and overall, the level design is still somewhat a trashy mess, but the level design is surprisingly open. It requires a mastery of the character to reach higher paths, and I really like that. So, while the level design isn't in the Angel Island, Hydra City, or Wake Fortress, heck, I'm even stressing by putting it here, but it's also not something I can call bad without lying. That being said, even if the level design was the best the game had ever seen, I'd still hate this zone. And that's because every other part, and I do mean every other part, of this zone sucks. Let's talk about that too. First off, let's start with the boss fights, because again, they piss me off the least. The mini-boss is really annoying in that it's basically a huge game of stalling. The boss starts off by throwing a flying disc around that bounces around the arena and breaks the blocks he touches. The objective is to get the disc to hit the robot while it's open and to avoid getting shocked by the robot when it's electric. When it's not electric, hitting it makes it open up. So, why exactly do I not like this boss? It mainly comes down to the fact that the disc can hurt you. It really doesn't make sense that the disc that you need to stand on at times to get the boss can damage you. The same thing happens in the Wing Fortress boss, and it's not that I like it there, but you can damage the boss directly in that boss fight, and it's the second to last boss of the game, so I think that pardons it just a bit. What the Carnival Night mini-boss ends up doing is making a weight game boss, which isn't what the classic Sonic boss fights are supposed to be about. They're meant to be about using your skill, dodging obstacles, and actually hitting the boss. Carnival Night's boss has no presence of any of that, and overall makes the level an annoyingly long game of trying to coordinate the disc into the machine 4 times. And that's exactly my problem with the main boss as well. The main boss is essentially a watered down, worse version of the Hydra City boss, in which it drags you into a specific place to try and hurt you.
The problem with the Carnival Night main boss is that the skill factor is completely absent. You can easily get 4 out of the 8 hits while he aimlessly floats around you in hitting range, not even defending himself from your attacks while you get the chance to hit him. Then he drops his ball, which most likely won't hurt you. Then he takes his sweet time to getting where the ball is, and then, finally, he starts an electrical attack, which sucks you in. The thing is, like Hydro City, this attack is useless if you hold the direction opposite the attack. Then he picks up the ball and starts the attack over. And guess what? The only reason I even know he picks up the ball after the attack is because I had to watch a video on the boss fight, since every time I fight this boss, I'm either supersonic and I defeat him instantly, or I'm not supersonic and I defeat him instantly. The boss is way too easy, and even if it isn't that, it's annoying. So next up, we have the music. And it also sucks horribly. But this zone is one of 3 zones that has a prototype music track. So let's hear and see if the fate of Carnival Night's soundtrack was never ever not gonna be a failure. What happened? This track isn't just better, it's on a league of its own. Sure, I wouldn't say it's a perfect match for the zone, but I'm not even paying attention to that when we ended up with this. And again, it's an Angel Island situation where the 2 acts sound nearly identical, so it sucks too. And lastly, we have the worst part of this zone, being the visuals. These levels' visuals are absolutely the worst I've ever seen. Hey, look guys, we found Techno Bass's ancestor. It literally looks like they asked the baby to draw the visuals, and then the baby finished drawing with one of those 96-pack crayons and they threw up on it. Sorry for the analogy, but this level looks really ugly, and the background isn't either very simplistic, like the upper part of the background with a triangle background as mountains, or the ugly mismatching of colors used to make the city below. This level sucks. In conclusion, while Carnival Night is not as bad as Marble Garden, it still lacks all the basic features I need from a classic Sonic level in order for me to consider it being good. And with that, let's move on to Ice Cap. Ice Cap Zone is surprisingly good. Like, honestly, considering ice levels aren't really known for being the greatest zones in the Sonic franchise, it's kinda ridiculous that the very first ice level can be considered by some people the best ice level in the series. It's not like any of the more recent ice levels are doing the ice level reputation any favors. So, let's talk about why Ice Cap is such a great level and what things it could work on. Ice Cap Zone is a very memorable level, but it's got some issues. And one of them is the level design. But it's more complex than that. When I say the level design is a bad thing in Ice Cap, for some reason, the difference in between acts in terms of level design is so different that it's kind of mind-blowing. In this case, we're talking about Act 1. I said it in Marble Garden, and I'll say it here. Vertical level design simply does not work for classic Sonic, or modern Sonic for that matter. The level just feels really boring and there's no exploration whatsoever. You kinda just move through the level holding left or right and defeating enemies. Nothing really makes me like this level design, and even Marble Garden had some exploration with the giant rings, but nope. It's not like it's a speedy stage either, it takes on average 2 to 4 minutes to beat the first act. But that's simply because of the staircase elevator things that can easily have you doing entire sections over again without a lightning shield. And that's what makes Act 1 level design so annoying. It's a boring climb to the top, no alternate paths or exploration, and overall it's not good. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is the boss fights. The mini-boss is essentially a worse version of the Metropolis boss, but not really. Unlike the Marble Garden mini-boss, this one has new attacks and new patterns. But it still has the major issue in which it becomes quite easy when you realize it takes less hits than an actual boss. It becomes tedious and kind of annoying to fight this thing, because unlike the Metropolis fight, you can't pop or break the ice cubes, so they're always rotating around the boss. This makes it borderline impossible to hit him without getting hit yourself, and with the boss almost always being out of reach, it becomes annoying. The main boss is better, it has no time where it's simply out of reach with nothing you can do about it, and you have to dodge its ice beams, but when you get hit by them, you freeze up for what seems like forever before getting out and losing your rings. It's especially stupid when you get frozen 2 or more times in a row. And I just don't get it. I get that that's the punishment for you not dodging the attack, but it's a huge pace breaker. Anytime I get here on a normal playthrough, I always use Supersonic because it really isn't worth the hassle to get frozen, wait for you to lose all your rings, and then try to attack the boss again only for it to turn around and hit you again. It's not an unplayable boss, it's just one that gets me really annoyed when I have to play it. That being said, let's talk about why I consider Ice Cap Zone a great level overall. Let's start off with the visuals, and wow, it really gives off the whole icy feel with the giant glaciers and the underground caverns. And despite the huge mountains in the background having as much detail as the Carnival Night mountains, I think it does more good than harm here. Next up, again we have the level design, and Act 2's level design is so different from Act 1, again it's kind of insane, and that also goes for its quality. While I think Act 1's level design is just an empty, boring climb of going up and down with no real obstacles, I think Act 2's level design is essentially a reincarnation of Angel Island's level design. Imagine if Angel Island Act 1 was longer, taller, and had more branching pathways. Then put an ice pack on it and bam, that's Ice Cap Act 2's level design. Until recording this footage, I had no idea that there was no need to even see the water in Act 2. There are so many different ways to go through this level with sections that blend in perfectly with each other. This level is also a very speedy one with plenty of loops and slopes to gain huge momentum. And even so, just because the level is fast doesn't mean that there's no exploration. There's plenty! Ring boxes, lives, lightning shields, giant rings, they're all here. It's a very good level design, but sadly, we don't get to see level design this good for a while.
No. Wait.
And lastly, the very best part of the level, that honestly carries the level to perfection for some, it's the music. Like, do I even need to explain myself? Everyone can genuinely agree that Ice Cap's music not only is a certified masterpiece, but it fits the theme of the level exceptionally well. And that's why I'll never play Origins. Sonic 3 Air is a better experience anyway, but let's take a listen to the prototype/Origins music just to see if it has anything on what we got. And it's okay. I will never say that it's better than what we got with the sane mind, but it does fit Ice Cap, and both of the acts don't make me wish I never had hearing ever again, so they're nice. Not comparable to the real Ice Cap music, but nice. In conclusion, while the boss fights and the Act 1 level design is either boring, annoying, or frustrating, the Act 2 level design, the visuals, and the god tier music are really what makes me consider Ice Cap an overall great zone. I really wish I could compliment the game more and not end off the review on a bad note, but launch phase exists, so... Launch base zone. It's a base that launches. I don't like this zone at all. It's been that for most of the time I've known of its existence. There was a period of time that I liked it, but I quickly realized that no matter how you look at it, this level doesn't really have anything good going for it, aside for some minor things. So let's talk about those first. Alright, let's see. What could possibly be good about Launch Base Zone? The music? The atmosphere? Possibly. It's not like I think this area is nice visually, but I can't really say it's bad. Having the Death Egg loom over the background throughout Act 1's background is a nice touch, showing we've made it to the machine, and the absence of it in Act 2 makes me think that Eggman went to go and power it off after he dropped the mini-boss for us. And the way the water bends based on how you enter is cool, I guess. Too bad that the ground looks actually decent? Yeah, I won't deny that this does not match the background in any sort of way, but it's not a bad ground. The mechanical pieces of metal look nice, and running on the metal pipes is kinda cool, I've gotta admit. Next up, we've got the boss fights, and oh my god, there's not one, not two, not three, but 4 bosses for Launch Base. And sadly, there's only one good one. If you're playing a normal playthrough, once you beat the 3rd boss, you finish the act and the cutscene starts playing. But that's if you're playing on Sonic 3 and Knuckles. If you're playing as Sonic or Tails in S3K, you don't get the final fight. but in Sonic 3 you do. And Big Arms might just be one of the coolest boss fights in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Scratch that, it is the coolest boss fight. The design of the machine, the way the background darkens, the actual mechanics of the boss, and the music of this boss fight is different from any other in the game, and this perfectly matches the tension of this boss. Being mid-air helps as well, and it's not just the build up to the boss that makes it really good, the boss itself holds its own. Now, I won't lie, it's not perfect. A phase 2 would be beneficial to the fight, especially since its movements and attacks are limited, but I don't hate it for not having it. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is surprisingly the difficulty of the boss. The Sonic series isn't really known for its difficulty. Update 3 before the patch update. Big Arms is kind of difficult. Now, since you're seeing an absolute master at work here, it doesn't look hard, but if those hands catch Sonic, they slam you down and you lose all your rings. Doesn't matter if you're Supersonic or not in the Genesis version either. Overall, Big Arms is a cool boss fight. And with that, well, let's talk about why this zone is genuinely a bad experience. Alright, now that we're done with the good stuff, let's commence my yapping, and the first thing I want to talk about is all the other boss fights, since they all have their own major problems. This time we're gonna take this backwards and start with this abomination. This thing swings the spike ball that blatantly defies physics and shoots laser beams while moving up and down. That's it. Not only does this make this boss extremely easy and boring, it's kinda ridiculous that this is the last thing you get to see in Sonic 3 and Knuckles before a huge cutscene plays that shows the death egg falling. So this is a pretty big part of the storyline. So I must ask, who on earth thought that this thing was the best thing to put here? It's barely a boss fight at this point, and you know what? It gets worse! Let's look at the second boss, and before I start talking about how bad this boss is, let's watch a playback. Do you see the problem here? If you said everything, then you win nothing because that was extremely obvious. There's next to no skill put into this boss. I can't even talk about it because literally nothing's happening. This isn't the worst boss in the classic Sonic games, but it's the most boring for sure. I don't even know how to critique it or improve it because it's beyond saving at this point. And lastly, we have the mini-boss, and it's incredibly annoying to fight. Remember back in the Ice Cap review where I talked about how bosses that are always out of reach are really annoying? Well, guess what this boss does when you hit it? What in the world were they thinking? Even Supersonic has to deal with this because it doesn't just go up, it does based on how high you jump to hit it the first time. It's not exactly the epitome of bad bosses, but if I'm able to beat any boss without taking damage and without pressing left or right Billabop style, then there's a serious problem. Next up is the music, and well, I don't even know what to say. This is exactly the same as Marble Garden, but with the Sonic CD special of having the music cut out for a few seconds for no reason. The origin music is... it's well... What the hell? Wow, this sucked. Better than the original launch base, but not by much. This is supposed to be music for a Sonic Zone, not the music that plays before the arrival of the presidents. And finally, the level design, and it's by far the worst part of the zone. Almost every object in this level, and I do mean almost every object in this level, isn't fair in any way. There's no way to tell when the spike walls are gonna crash into the ground. There's no way to tell when the flamethrowers are gonna shoot fire out. There's no time to react when the frog enemies swing their attack. Spikes casually come in and out of the ground, and this time, unlike Carnival Night, you can't even catch a glimpse of the spikes protruding from the ground. Do you see what I mean? And it's a shame that this is the case, because even though the base level design doesn't have anything on the Angel Island level design or the Hydro City level design, there's some exploration to be done here, especially in Act 2. You can't win it all, I guess. Launch-based zone is just a straight bad zone. And honestly, Big Arms is all it has going for it. Mushroom Hill has got to be one of, if not the worst opening to a classic Sonic game I have ever seen. I'm pretty sure it can generally be agreed upon that the Sonic 3 half of Sonic 3 and Knuckles is better than the End Knuckles portion, and Mushroom Hill, as a level, isn't really doing much to help out with the general agreement of that statement. And since first impressions really do mean a lot, it makes Mushroom Hill a lot worse. Truth be told, I don't think I would ever play Sonic and Knuckles by itself. I never did, so the transition from launch base to this zone was seamless and therefore I just kept playing, but if this was swapped with Angel Island, I don't think I'd ever play Sonic 3 Knuckles. Yes, I know that's harsh to say, but I'm being serious. Don't believe me? Well, let's talk about it then. Now, despite the fact I absolutely did not praise Mushroom Hill Zone at the start of the video, I still do have quite a bit of things to say that this level surprisingly does well. And one of the major points I have is the balance between speed sections and generally having time for exploration. If you'd rather not go as fast and explore the zone with its extremely vertical level design, then have at it. I must admit that 90% of the exploration to be done in the zone is for the giant rings. So if you're not trying to get the big rings, the most you're getting is an upper route, but hey, it's part of the level and it's good, so it's here. And the speed factor isn't completely obsolete either. There are plenty of springs, loops, and some gimmicks that help you achieve top speeds. I mean, just look at this. And the last thing I want to mention is the environment and general aesthetic of the zone. Now, Mushroom Hill is one of those zones that change throughout it, and overall it actually looks pretty good. Now, I'm not saying I prefer the zone's visual design, but I can't really say it's bad without lying. The ground though is genuinely a good ground for each of the seasons. The grass texture is a lot different and more detailed from Marble Garden, for example. So overall, the environment does fit the level properly, and the balancing between speed and exploration is present. However, when I said Mushroom Hill was one of, if not the worst opening zones for Classic Sonic, I was not joking. Let's talk about that too. Okay, so right off the bat, the first thing I'd like to mention is the music, and it's actually not downright atrocious. Here, take a listen. The music isn't like Scrap Brain, Marble Garden, or Carnival Night like I've said before in my previous videos, but it just doesn't sit well with me. I simply can't see people genuinely liking the music in this zone. The beginning isn't anything special, by the time you're in the middle it's still getting a little better, but just when you think it becomes something memorable, the song just concludes and starts over again. I do have to admit, it's not horrible. When I say Mushroom Hill's music is bad, I don't mean it in the sense that Marble Garden is. I don't like Mushroom Hill's music, and I hate Marble Garden's music. So the music is mediocre at its best point. Next up, we've got to talk about the level design, and surprisingly enough, this is the reason I hate Mushroom Hill, because despite the fact that speed and exploration is nicely done in this level, the gimmicks absolutely put any hopes of this level design being decent into the ground. I don't think I even need to explain to you why this level's gimmicks are absolute trash. There are ropes that hold you and need you to stop in place and full spin dash just to get out of. Having yourself just barely reach the pole will have you start an animation that you can't stop and will literally get you flying at top speed. And when you're not trying to break the sound barrier, it can get pretty annoying. And don't even get me started on the enemies in this level. These sets of mobs are all, yes, all extremely annoying. The butterflies can just show up out of nowhere and can phase through the ground and walls, making them extremely hard enemies to defeat if you miss your timing. Last time I checked, I don't remember Vexes being in Sonic and Knuckles. Stupid mole thing, it won't even hurt you. If that was the case, it would be at least alright, but no. They send out mushrooms that bounce you back and could be the reason why you get hit by another enemy. And I cannot stress this enough. Putting the player out of control should always be kept to a minimum. So having an enemy's whole purpose to simply be taking control away isn't something I appreciate. The bouncing enemy has a shield, so you eventually have to hit this enemy twice before hitting it and killing it, and let me tell you, by itself it's not a problem. Pair these up with any other bad gimmick and they become the epitome of all bad things in life. And these guys are always in combination in some way. And guess what? We haven't even talked about the bosses. These two boss fights should have the award for being one of the worst boss fights of all time. Both of them start in hitting range, which is already a huge problem. The mini boss continuously stays in hitting range, throwing the most lousy attacks I've ever seen. The main boss is essentially over before it starts because of the way they placed it. I mean, just look at this. What is this? Why is this? These boss fights are a piece of cake. This is supposed to be a boss fight, not a checkpoint. This is a joke. This is garbage. This is inexcusable. For all 7.5 of you who genuinely have any sort of compassion for the zone, then feel free to tell me in the comments, because I could not tell you why on earth anyone sees anything in this zone. And if you don't insta-kill and nearly insta-kill the bosses, if you don't get screwed over by the zone's awful mechanics, and don't have issues with the enemies crawling out from the pits of Sonic 1, if you don't get annoyed with any of this level's horrible features, which mind you is nearly impossible, then at best, you get a mediocre level. Flying Battery Zone is arguably the best zone in Sonic & Knuckles. This zone might just be the only zone I can actually say I like without crossing my fingers, and that's simply because of how it manages to execute every good thing a level needs so perfectly. It's truly a wonder how a level this good ended up in Sonic & Knuckles instead of Sonic 3. It's almost like it was supposed to be in Sonic 3. Either way, let's talk about what Flying Battery's problems are and also why it's such a great level overall. So, what could possibly be wrong with Flying Battery, given the fact I did say how good of a level it is? The first thing I'd like to talk about is actually the boss fights, and why they aren't very good at all. The mini-boss is extremely creative, fooling the player into thinking that they're safe from harm and are going to clear the act, only for something unusual to happen is a sick idea. Same as the signpost actually being the hat of the heavy magician from Mania, and the signpost leaving in classic Sonic's Crisis City and Generations. So, it's very cool that Flying Battery's mini-boss does this, but the problem with it is the boss fight itself. I'll play the boss fight back, and we'll see if the problem is extremely obvious. Do you see the problem here? You're just doing the same action over and over again, and the boss can't even do anything about it. It's a mini-boss, so I'm not expecting a phase 2 or anything of the sort, but at least you could try to make it so that you can't cheese the boss. Now, let's move on to the second boss, and if you see how this boss fight is going, I think it's pretty obvious what I'm going to say. This boss can't even be damaged, it's just a huge and boring waste of time, just avoiding a laser room that isn't even hard to avoid, and waiting until Eggman actually decides that blowing up his own ship isn't optimal. Alright, so the first two bosses were boring, but the third one is really the one that gets me angry because unlike the previous ones, this boss gets extremely annoying at times. The boss starts off by jump scaring you with no indication or time to react, and even if you do know where it is, you won't be able to get any hits in. Then he starts blowing flames up at you and either gets surprisingly hard to avoid, or becomes extremely annoying to just sit there and wait for him to blow his fourth flame up into the air before he finally starts swinging again. And then by that point, you just jump once into his swing and then he just dies. Again, it's either you wait for 15 seconds and then insta-kill the boss, or you get obliterated by the flames or his spiked hands. I can't say some of the boss fight isn't just challenge, but every time I die, I always feel like there's nothing I could have done about it. And that's why I don't like the boss fights in Flying Battery. And the last thing I want to talk about is the level design. Yes, the main part of the level is something I partially dislike in Flying Battery. Because this is a sky level like Wing Fortress, falling into pits is something that unfortunately happens really often. Sometimes you won't see the next platform you need to jump onto. So, for example, falling into a bottomless pit just because you came out of the loop at the wrong time, or because you accidentally fire shielded into oblivion isn't exactly great. There aren't many places in the zone where this can be a serious issue, but when it's there, it's very bad. And that's basically all I have to say about bad things with Flying Battery. Now though, let's talk about why I love this zone so much, and why it's arguably the best zone in the game. Now, where do I even start with all the good things to say about Flying Battery? It's honestly just that good of a level. I guess we should start off with the visuals of the level, and it's amazing. The level taking place in the sky with the airship feel makes it cool by default, but Flying Battery seems to make the appeal even better. The outside area is a huge difference from Wing Fortress's less detailed sky, which now has merged clouds and more detail. And inside is also extremely detailed with huge machinery and capsules all in the background. We haven't gotten to see a lot of the inside of Eggman's airship before this point, so Flying Battery does justice to what we missed in Skybase from Sonic 1 and the Master System and Wing Fortress. Next up, we've got the music, and my goodness, just listen to this! Everyone knows about Ice Cap's music, but I don't see anyone talking about Flying Batteries. This music not only fits with the level's more fast-paced level design, but it's also just a good track. I genuinely think that this music is on par with Ice Cap, and overall it's one of the few classic Sonic zones that I can listen to outside of the game. And lastly, the best part of the zone, it's the level design.
And the last thing I want to talk about is the level design. Yes, the main part of the level is something I partially dislike in Flying Battery.
And crazily enough, this level design isn't anything like Angel Island or Ice Cap Act 2. This zone goes fast. Plenty of loops and boost panels to make you go extremely quickly. This might just be one of the fastest zones if you know what you're doing, and even though the speed factor is the main attraction, exploration is still a factor of the zone. It must be said that speed is definitely way more done here than exploration is, so it's obvious that there's some certain issues with the gameplay. Pushing normal looking spikes to reveal a big ring isn't exactly the best exploration. There are a lot of better examples for how Flying Battery incorporates fast-paced exploration. Again, I must admit, the level design isn't perfect. Most of the outside platforming is executed horribly with its extremely annoying moving platforms and its bottomless pits. The huge corkscrews on the inside of the airship can be extremely punishing if you don't know if they're coming, but overall, the fast-paced level design is something I actually enjoy quite a bit. Overall, I love Flying Battery Zone. It's my favorite zone in Sonic 3 Knuckles along with another zone, and once again, it can be argued that this is the best zone in Sonic and Knuckles.
You know, in this series of reviewing different zones in the classic Sonic games, most of the time it's always me defending zones that are generally disliked. I defended Labyrinth Zone at the start of the series, defended Metropolis Zone for a period of time in my Green Hill Zone video, and defended Marble Zone as well. Even Wing Fortress, a level from Sonic 2 that is generally a level people write off as mediocre at best, is actually my favorite zone in the game. But Sandopolis Zone? Nah man, I just can't. There's just no saving this zone because it's simply that bad. Now, it isn't the worst zone in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but that's not really saying much considering your competition are these two. Either way, let's just get into the things that Sandopolis actually manages to do somewhat decently, because it's really gonna need it. Well, the first thing I'd like to mention that Sandopolis does have on its good side is actually the music. Now, not only does the Sandopolis Zone soundtrack not fit the theme of the Pyramid Desert vibe that Sandopolis gives off, but in the overall gist of things, the soundtrack isn't great. Yes, it has its own good moments like here, but overall, it's not at the level that zones like Angel Island and Reef Fortress have in terms of music. I mean, yeah, it's not completely bad, it's a 7 out of 10 at best and 3 at worst, so it's not a zone soundtrack I dislike, but I can assure you you'll never see me listen to the zone's music outside of the game. Funny enough, you won't even hear the music, especially in Act 2, because of a certain gimmick we'll get to later. One other thing I can't particularly say is good, but not bad, is the background. And the thing is, I can't even say that about both of the acts. The Act 1 background is pretty good, having the huge pyramid, the nice purple to orange gradient with the sun setting, and the background clashing properly with the ground in a way that doesn't make it too obtrusive, but a lot of that isn't true with the Act 2 background. For one, you're now inside a pyramid, so the outside light and general less offensive feel is gone. What replaces it is its extremely grainy background. There really isn't anything I can truly say to make you understand what I'm trying to say, but if you look at it, you can clearly see what I'm talking about. There's too much colors, way too much shadow detail, and it ends up making a lot of the background look charred and burnt. And it's obviously not what they're trying to do, and it gets way worse when some certain gimmicks come into the picture. Yes, the Act 1 background is a pleasure to look at, especially with the heatwave effect, and the music does have its good moments. There's a really justified reason why people call Sandopolis Zone the worst zone in Sonic & Knuckles. Let's talk about that too. Man, where can I even start with the horrible things with Sandopolis? There's so many problems with the zone. We should, as we always do, start off with the boss fights because of the sheer disappointment I got from these set of bosses. Look, I don't expect a lot from classic Sonic boss fights because most of the time they aren't great. But these, the mini-boss and boss of the zone are so horribly disappointing that I just have to point them out. The mini-boss is a rock golem that literally does not attack you. You just knock him over repeatedly, or just jump over to the sandpit and spam jump. He just jumps over to you, so if you're in the sandpit, he just kills himself. Or if you're knocking him over, he doesn't retaliate or anything. Just straight up gets pushed over and does nothing about it. That being said, there is a way to die in the fight, so it's not completely useless, but you'd have to be AFK to somehow lose. And the boss might actually be worse. Yes, at least the boss has a laser attack, but that's if you've actually seen it. The attack is also so uselessly slow and unthreatening. And between attacks, he just stops when you hit his weak point, and nothing else stops you. Sure, if you really want to be technical, then the spikes under his attack point can hit you off, but your links splatter where you fall and can just bounce right back. And it's such a shame because the potential for these bosses could be massive. Imagine a sand tornado or something similar having to maybe home and attack the right enemies to get to the boss, or actually having the huge golem for the boss actually move swiftly or anything cool like that. But instead, we get a useless raw golem and an immobile wall of rock that's super easy to kill. So yes, the bosses suck again. And also, the level design is abysmal. Look, I get it. Having a normal level with no gimmicks while trying to make it interesting isn't really easy. But bad gimmicks are not the solution. Having slides is cool, but having to go up them isn't fun in any way. In the beginning of Act 2, there's an infinite loop section where you need to know which slide to go on proceed and for what. It's confusing, offers no reward, and it's essentially just a waste of time. We have these stupid ledge things that you can grab onto, but again, it's just a huge waste of time with no reward for it. Maybe just getting rings on the way, but no, not even that. What makes it worse is that alternatively, you can just drop down and get to the same destination easier and faster. Look at the vines at the very beginning of Angel Island. It's an alternative route, lets you reach the upper path faster, and rewards you with an invincibility monitor. That's how you make a good gimmick and use it properly, and this isn't. And you know what? It really doesn't get much better because in Act 2, things get a lot worse. Firstly, we have the pushing machines, and they just make things annoying. You basically need to push levers over in order to progress in the level, and it would have been way better if they were just straight up removed. Having the fact that a gimmick is better off not existing as opposed to it being there is not a good thing, and that perfectly suits Sandopolis Zone's gimmicks it shows. And the most annoying thing about the lever gimmick is no matter where you are or how fast you pass the gate that you use the lever to open, as long as the lever isn't done pushing itself back, it makes this extremely annoying sound. Also, the main gimmick that Sandopolis is known for needs to be addressed, because there's another type of lever you can pull down in order for the lights to not go out on you and have ghosts come out at you. If they charge you and you're not in a ball, then they hit you and you lose rings. But that's not even the problem, because to get to the darkest state takes a while, and to get the ghost to actually attack you takes almost just as long. The problem I have is linked to another horrible thing that Sandopolis Act 2 has, being its extremely charry and grainy background. Like I said, a lot of the background looks really dark and it makes it kind of annoying when ground tiles use darker palettes. You know what pairs horribly with that? That's right, it's when the whole zone gets dark. Look, I don't have problem with visually seeing in zones generally. Not most. Carnival Night's visual design makes no sense and looks ugly. That's the problem I should expect from a classic Sonic zone. Not simply being unable to see. Either other than that, the level design and gimmicks just get way worse. And if that still doesn't assure you that this level sucks, the two levels that Sandopolis is sandwiched between, Flying Battery and Lava Reef, have way better level design, better gimmicks, better music, oh my god, better music, better boss fights, basically better everything. So when you ask someone what the worst zone is, it really isn't challenged because of how abysmal it is. Sandopolis Zone is a perfect example of how majority of the community can actually be right about something, and I can say without much doubt that yes, Sandopolis Zone is the worst zone in Sonic & Knuckles. To continue disproving one of the comments I received on my Sandopolis video, and to continue addressing some certain opinions about how I dislike most of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, despite me saying it's my favorite classic Sonic game, we're gonna talk about another extremely unique zone that manages to be good even though it's very different from the average good zone, and has minor faults, being Lava Reef Zone. This zone has some serious shoes to fill in, considering the fact that the zone before left a really bad taste in our mouths. So, does it live up to the expectations? Can it be considered among the best zones in the game, or is it just a bit away from what I would consider the greatest? Let's get into it. One big issue that pretty much everyone can agree on when it comes to Lava Reef is, you guessed it, the extremely long boss fights.
Yes, I know I complain about the boss of like every single video of mine, but let's just ignore that, okay?
Besides, I actually have a really good reason to genuinely dislike the boss fights that this zone has, and the reason is simply because, without a doubt, these two boss fights are by far the longest boss fights that the entirety of Sonic 3 and Knuckles has to offer. Frankly, it isn't even that close. The mini-boss has a foundation similar to Death Egg's boss, you know, the last zone in the game, and the boss itself is the tankiest boss in all of classic Sonic, even tankier than the Death Egg robot. Yes, the final boss in Sonic 2. The mini-boss isn't really as bad as the boss because for the first attack you can focus on one of the tentacles that show up and kill it, do some damage to the hands, and then kill the other tentacle. From there, you can focus on the giant hand by getting in as many hand as possible before the hand moves away. Be warned, however, that the hand doesn't exactly work like Death Egg's hands. In the Death Egg fight, you can spin dash and not get hurt by the fingers backing you down, but in this fight you can. So, with all that being said, the mini-boss doesn't sound all that bad, right? The answer is actually yes. The attacks need to be dodged, it's not fundamentally a bad boss, and the issues I have with most other bosses being the placement, bad attacks, and non-technical gimmicks are not in the boss fight. Heck, it's even got some variation. So what's the problem? Well, it's pretty simple. For a mini-boss, heck, even for a boss, this boss fight takes way too many hits to beat. And I don't think it's that out of the pocket to say that no matter how interesting a boss fight is, it gets kind of tedious when it takes at least 6 hits, and majority of the time, 14 hits to beat. It should be noted that if you beat the arms first, the tentacles die too, but how the heck am I supposed to know that? And now we have the boss itself, and it was the longest amount of hits needed to be a boss fight unconditionally. Then the record was broken by Sonic 4 Episode 1, which had a 26 hit final boss and still holds that record to this day. But that's not important. I say unconditionally because like the mini-boss, it takes 14 hits to kill, but unlike the mini-boss, there's nothing you can do to stop the boss from being 14 hits. Why not just use Supersonic or Hypersonic? Surely, even though it takes a ludicrous amount of hits to kill, using a super transformation should help make the boss less tedious. Well, actually, no, it doesn't. Matter of fact, this boss is one of the rare bosses where turning into Super or Hypersonic actually harms your chances of getting through the boss because you can't even damage it. The boss shoots out mines that need to hit the mech 14 different times before he can die, so using 50 rings to turn Super without the flame shield, which is generously given to you right before the boss, will have you inevitably use all your rings and your transformation, leaving you with no protection to fend yourself against the boss. Again, there is a fire shield before the boss starts, so the easiest and fastest way for you to defeat this boss is to get the shield and jump over every single mine, which isn't a problem, but that means that the minimal time this boss takes is 42 seconds. For the average classic Sonic boss fight, that's a whole lot, and it's either extremely repetitive and boring jumping over spiky spears, or trying your absolute best to try and not die to both the lava and the mines and ultimately die to any number of reasons. The boss fights in Lava Reef are not good by any means, but they aren't like any bosses which I can say are completely irredeemable. With that said though, let's talk about why Lava Reef, despite its flaws, can match up with all of the other great zones in the game. Alright, now that we've discussed what I dislike about Lava Reef, let's talk about something I can really say is generally liked about the zone, being the music. Levels in classic Sonic rarely have a feel to the music. For example, Flying Battery's music is spectacular and fits the zone. I'm not going to deny that, but you can't really say there's a sense of theme that it has in its zone. But something that's obvious in Lava Reef is that, despite the zone being relatively normal, what happens after this zone is very crucial to the story. So the music kind of reflects that, having an ending that concludes instead of just looping back to the start. Maybe I'm just speaking absolute crap, but what I'm trying to say is that the zone has extremely good music, and I personally see a meaning behind it. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the visual aspect of the level, and it's amazing. Volcanic theming doesn't really seem all that interesting, but Lava Reef really amazes me with its clear technical gimmicks like the spitting spike balls, and the rocks that have a lot of depth really showing the heat. But that's nothing compared to the background, as both of them are absolutely amazing. The Act 1 background shows a clear night sky with glistening stars under a volcanic landscape, which looks really nice, and arguably the Act 2 background is even better, with magma and the back showing a cave. Both are really nice backgrounds that blend in with the actual gameplay really well. And the last thing I'd like to mention about Lava Reef is actually the level design, and it's actually a lot more complicated than me than, oh, this level design is so good. Firstly, something I want to mention is that Lava Reef is really a relatively slow level. You're not going through too many loops or having prolonged speed sections, you're kind of just exploring the surprisingly open area. Now, I'm not saying the levels like Marble Garden or Carnival Night, where there are many sections where you can simply not see any terrain other than the ground you're standing on. It's still clearly an enclosed area, but it's actually pretty wide compared to levels like Mystic Cave and Labyrinth Zone. This obviously brings up the question, is it fun? You know, because levels don't have good level design if they don't have 120 loops and mindlessly running forward. Get out! Alright, jeez, I'm sorry. Well, actually, it's not a bad zone in Act 1. The exploration is very fun, finding things like lightning, ring boxes, and lives is really cool. I will admit some gimmicks like the floating platform with the spikes on the bottom and the spiky balls that rotate in a 3D sort of way are questionable, but for the most part, it's not something I can say is bad. But Act 2? Boy, I don't like this act at all. Back in Act 1, there was a lava geyser that didn't bring you to complete stop, had a clear indication, and honestly looked kind of cool. It was a nice way for you to incorporate a part of the setting properly into a hazard that is fair. The equivalent of it in Act 2 doesn't fit well and doesn't have any type of warning, which is extremely annoying when you reach the hazard at higher speeds. In Lava Reef, the enemy that puts you in a gas that sucks your rings is kind of annoying, but in Act 1 they come in ones, and rolling pretty much guarantees that it isn't a problem. But look at this in Act 2! It's not even mentioning the absurd level design with moving platforms, having block movement, and it's a spring yard of all things, no real exploration or speed so nobody wins, and overall the huge difference between Act 1 and Act 2 isn't really a good thing for this zone. Overall, the boss fights in Act 2 aren't things I actually prefer in this zone, but the banger music, the amazing visuals, and the level design Act 1 displays are all things that contribute towards my statement that Lava Reef is, all in all, a great zone.
By the way, why didn't you talk about the Act 2 music? It's a lot different from the Act 1 music, so that means you didn't review the whole thing!
Well, first of all, this bit wouldn't exist if I did forget about the music, and secondly, the reason why I didn't review it is because of... Man, what can I even say about Hidden Palace? And you know, I don't even mean that in the sense that it's too good or too bad to the point that I don't know where to start. I mean in the sense that it's extremely short. Like really, where do I even begin? There really is only one place that can really direct my review on, and it's the boss fight, because before the boss fight, you're simply just getting to reach it, and after the boss, it's a cutscene taking you to Sky Sanctuary. So, let's start off and end off this review with the one thing Hidden Palace actually has, being the Knuckles boss fight. Firstly, I do want to talk about everything that happens before the boss in relation to it, because it's very important to the boss itself. Throughout Sonic's adventure through Angel Island, it's extremely obvious that Knuckles is a huge block in the way. He broke the bridge at the end of Angel Island, broke another one in Hydra City, turns off the light and turns on a second machine in Carnival Night, and overall, the game is very obviously stating that Knuckles is just a big jerk. He's trapping you constantly and stopping your journey, also teaming with Eggman, and it all ends here, not just for you, but also for Knuckles. On his side, he's trying to stop you from invading his island, and this is his last stand, as immediately after this, it's the Master Emerald, what he's protecting. This fight is the last thing Knuckles can possibly do before he can't do anything anymore. So, the boss fight, in that sense, is very good. In terms of how the boss is established, the symbolism, and the environment, the boss is always going to be one of the best in the series. Knuckles is always attacking you indirectly, so the fight makes sense for him to drop all his tactics and actually defend the Master Emerald with his body. And in the end, Sonic beats Knuckles and knocks him over in a very similar way that Knuckles did at the very beginning of the game. Yeah, I know I'm dragging the review out by talking about the story, but again, there really isn't much to talk about. Boss fight itself though, yeah, I've got to admit that boss fight sucks badly. There's a big saying within the Sonic community that until Sonic rushes boss fights with Blaze and Sonic, every other boss that is a character versus another character isn't really that good. And yeah, it's true with Metal Sonic being an anomaly. The boss doesn't live up to its hype at all. And thankfully, it's not just like straight out bad, but if you look at the footage, you can easily see the problem with it. It has extremely easy to read and dodgeable attacks, and in my case, you might not even see it, because Knuckles got stuck in a corner and I just beat him up without much issue. So overall, Hidden Palace isn't actually a bad zone by any means. It's a good climax to the story with a good segue into Sky Sanctuary, but that's about it. The boss fight that has been basically foreshadowed since the very beginning of the game isn't the greatest boss fight out there, but it's not like I'd rather this zone not exist. I think that the game files perfectly describe my opinions on Hidden Palace Zone. It's literally just the Lava Reef Act 3. So yeah, Hidden Palace is a good zone, but it's not making it onto anybody's top 5 Sonic zones. Sky Sanctuary Zone. When it comes to single act zones, this is the most likely thing to come to mind, and it is unironically one of the best zones that the entirety of Classic Sonic has to offer. It far surpasses zones with double the length in terms of how good it is, despite the fact that it only has a singular act, and that's simply because of this fact that Sky Sanctuary has so much quality jam-packed into it. Why is that, and can this level really be that good? Let's get into it. The only really bad thing about Sky Sanctuary is something that's actually pretty important, being the level design. And for Sky Sanctuary, this is a bigger problem than for most other zones. For example, Ice Cap's Act 1 level design is boring at best and obnoxious at worst, but it had the Act 2's level design, which was extremely good and was essentially a remaking of Angel Island's extremely speed and exploration based levels. Lava Reef has a horrible second act that had everything that made Lava Reef's level design good stripped away from it. but the first act was very open, explorative, and nice to replay every time. Sky Sanctuary doesn't have the luxury of having a second act or a demon part of its zone. If the music is awful in Sky Sanctuary, it affects the whole zone. If there's an annoying gimmick, there's no act to remove it from the picture. And unfortunately, Sky Sanctuary suffers from this to an extent. Unlike most Sky levels, when you fall from a platform, chances are you aren't gonna die. Now this may sound like a good thing. If you won't die, that should stop things like extremely unfair moments where you get a game over, right? Well, the opposite end of the stick is that when you do fall, you can fall. I'm talking from the first boss fight to the beginning of the X type of falling. This is inherently worse than simply dying because doing something over and over again is never fun, and there's no real guarantee you'll make it back to where you were without dying anyway. I'm not saying you'll always not die, or even that you'll always get set back so far, but when you combine this with the extreme lack of checkpoints in this zone, that always doesn't match up in the best way. And another thing that Sky Sanctuary struggles with are some irritating gimmicks. The rolling spike balls are almost always a nuisance because they always seem to appear when you're either going crazy fast or you're not going as fast but still have a very decent momentum going on. And the enemies are always seemingly in places where if you get unfairly hit, you'll fall. But in all honesty, there really isn't much more I can say that is a real problem with Sky Sanctuary. So let's talk about why Sky Sanctuary is, in my opinion, interchangeable with the best zone in the entirety of Sonic & Knuckles. I wanted to start the good section of this review off with the first two things you experience when you enter Sky Sanctuary. And one of them is the background, my lord. Flying Battery's background is already extremely detailed with its well-shaped clouds. How did it get even better than that? Yes, other than the clouds there isn't anything else, but there doesn't have to be anything else. Its background obviously works in correlation with the theming, and the second thing that Sky Sanctuary greets you with is its music, and oh my goodness. Sky Chase's song had this feeling of victory with the tune, but Sky Sanctuary gives off huge waves of satisfaction that everything's over. It's no wonder they actually used this song again at the end of the game, because I think they had that in mind when making the track. A very good track with nothing bad to say about it, because it simply doesn't have any mistakes in it. Another great thing that Sky Sanctuary has at its disposal is that it's one of the only zones that has a cutscene before and after the zone. At the beginning of the act, we see Eggman launch the Death Egg up into the sky, and Sonic and Tails chase it down. And at the very end of the level, they just don't fade the screen to black and drop you off in Death Egg Zone, no. We get a whole cutscene where Mecha Sonic actually tries to stop you by crumbling a huge part of Sky Sanctuary, and Sonic has to run quickly to jump onto the Death Egg. Perfect storytelling, and it honestly amazes me every time I see the cutscene unfold. Another thing that makes me love this zone is for its boss fights. Yes, even the Green Hill and Metropolis boss fights. The original versions of these bosses are uninteresting at best and infuriating at worst, but having the Insta Shields add Elemental Shields adds such an interesting layer to the boss that it makes it more like a gimmick than a boss fight. And Green Hill's Recreation doesn't have an invincibility monitor right before the boss, so that's always cool. And the main boss of the act is one of the coolest bosses. Its attacks are all learnable yet threatening. The design looks super neat, and it's so cool that even after defeat, Mecha Sonic actually still lives on, assuming it crumbles a huge part of Sky Sanctuary, and even manages to go super later on in the story. It's honestly amazing how this guy just wouldn't go down. And the final thing to seal the deal that yes, Sky Sanctuary is unrivaled, is the amazing incorporation of the level design. Even though I've listed out the problems I have with it, it still has a lot of offer in terms of amazing quality that counteract most bad things that it has. Enemies being put at the edge of a cliff? Chances are you won't get unfairly knocked off, and even so, there's only one kind of enemy who's like fodder. Falling off all the time? You can manage how far back you fall, because you can catch yourself at any given moment. Matter of fact, that clip I showed you of me falling to the beginning of the level didn't just happen, I made it happen to show that it can. The level design is definitely unique, having the end goal be up instead of right. The exploration is plentiful, and the speed factor, while not as emphasized as levels like Flying Battery, still has a lot of merit in that regard. All in all, Sky Sanctuary, while only being one act long, manages to be better than most zones that have triple its runtime. While the occasional annoying gimmick in the vertical level design can be an issue at times, the amazing music, stellar balance with shortcuts, exploration and speed, and its amazing visuals make me believe that Sky Sanctuary is the other best zone in Sonic & Knuckles. Death Egg Zone. It's the final two-act zone in Sonic 3 & Knuckles, and it's meant to be a reimagining of Death Egg Zone from Sonic 2, as opposed to it being simply a boss rush. and it is one of the worst zones that Sonic 3 and Knuckles has to offer. Yes, we're done with every good zone in the game, so I'll be ending off this review on a bad note. Death Zone is so bad in any aspect it has, from the gimmicks to its horrible music, which I've constantly stated throughout my reviews. Is Death Egg really that bad? And is there anything that can redeem what I've decided is horrible? Let's get into it. Well, unfortunately, Death Egg doesn't have a lot of redeeming quality to it, and that's why the only good thing I have to say about the zone is the visual aspect. And no, I'm not even saying that Death Egg's visuals are stunning, or even above just average, but there are some aspects that fit properly within the aesthetic. The background of Act 1 is really nice, showing how huge the Death Egg really is, and the Act 2 background is even better, showing the planet in the background, but really I couldn't firmly say that it's better than the Sonic 2 background, and that's never a good thing. I really wish there was anything, and I mean anything else, that I could say that is even just decent, but sadly it seems like all the classic Sonic games always have to end off on a bad note. Let's get into why Death Egg Zone from Sonic 3 and Knuckles is one of the worst endings to any classic Sonic game. Alright, let's see what aspect we should start off with the bad things in Death Egg Zone. Considering the fact that we always start with the boss fights in the zone, and this is the last Sonic 3 and Knuckles review video, I don't see why we won't do the same. And my goodness, this mini-boss is the worst one in the entire game, and that's not even an exaggeration. If you've watched any of my other videos throughout the Sonic 3 and Knuckles reviews I've done, then you'd know that I always love to rave on and on about how a Phase 2 would be beneficial to bosses. And finally, we get one. Red Eye is the one and only mini-boss in the game that has a second phase, and after playing it, I can confidently say that I'm glad there aren't any other mini-bosses other than this one. But while Phase 2 of the boss is my main source of me disliking the mini-boss, the Phase 1 isn't exactly scot-free. The boss is extremely annoying to fight, having rotating spike balls around it at all times, having them drop down on you and hurt you is guaranteed to happen, and after you hit him, spike cat are all around. What this does is essentially make the Act 1 boss impossible to defeat without getting hit, and that's not a good thing because of Phase 2. This phase takes what was once a very infuriating and annoying boss and cranks it up to 11. There's a laser beneath it, spinning platforms that have spikes underneath them too, and with the speeds the platform move at, it's a miracle that getting hits are possible in the first place, let alone hitting the boss without getting hit yourself. And like I said, considering the Phase 1 damages you to 2 or even a singular ring, Phase 2 literally just finishes you off. And the boss fights don't get any better. The first boss is unnecessarily long, having the whole goal being to have the mines hit the mech. Yes, in theory this sounds pretty cool, and bouncing off the mines isn't a bad thing per se, but having the mines explode that always land in the tube endings and how long the boss fight becomes due to it isn't cool. And the last boss is even more annoying in its Phase 2. Phase 1, no big deal, you're just destroying fingers, how hard could it be? But when Phase 2 starts, you'd better have some rings, because if not, you're basically just asking to die. And because this is a Labyrinth Zone Act 3 situation where once you die, you don't get rings again, it's very likely you'll end up facing the boss with no rings anyway. So for the last time, the bosses are horrible. Another really important part of Death Egg Zone that is absolutely abysmal is the music. Something I've continuously reinstated multiple times throughout my reviews, and it still stands. This zone has a very boring soundtrack, and it doesn't even have a lot of even simply decent points. The only part I can truly say that I think is mediocre is this part over here. And Act 2 isn't any different, so it's not like I have any differing opinions on it. And lastly, what I think is the second worst aspect of the level, yes, the boss fights are the worst, the god-awful level design. And how better to show off how ridiculous this level design is than to show a live reaction to how the beginning of Act 2 is most likely to start for most people. Literally everything about this level design is only what I can call horrible. The base level design is very bad with its unneeded long stretches of emptiness throughout both acts. I will admit Act 2's level design is slightly better, but slightly isn't cutting it. The gimmicks are straight up bad. The little dart of the floating platforms are a nuisance, the laser floors only exist to stall, and the machine that takes you around the place is, well, just look at it. It's It's a completely useless mechanic that only exists to look cool instead of actually having functionality. And to reply to one of my comments, I can agree, okay? A passive check is a probable reason why some gimmicks are in the game, but that doesn't excuse the fact that they are slower than not using it, hence why it shouldn't exist. If the wall climbing in Sandopolis is a passive check, is the gimmick that holds you place in Mushroom Hill Zone also a passive check? Is the machine that carries you up in Launch Base also a passive check? Is this machine in Death Egg also a passive check? And if so, why? Why do we need so many reminders that some gimmick serves no purpose other than to be a halt movement? And the enemies aren't better either. The star enemy can completely hold your momentum if you're unprepared, and the enemy with the spike wall rotating around isn't placed well or they're unavoidable. This zone really does suck. Believe it or not, I don't like Death Egg Zone. While yes, the visuals of the background are better than decent and the ground tiles are actually pretty impressive, the lackluster boss fights, the uninteresting music, and the terrible level design makes me believe that Death Egg Zone is truly a bad zone. It's not any Marble Garden or Sandopolis, but it's not like it's good either. And that's Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Thank you guys so much for watching through the entire series. We've made a lot of videos. It's taken a lot of time. But again, Sonic 3 and Knuckles is the longest classic Sonic game, so I can't say I didn't expect it to take this long. So anyway, that's the end of the game. If you're a loser and you didn't collect the 7 Chaos Emeralds! Finally, to actually end off the Sonic 3 and Knuckles review, we have Doomsday Zone. The final act of Sonic 3 and Knuckles that's only accessible if you're not a stuck-up snob and think that the Sonic 3 special stage has any kind of problem. Hidden Palace Zone didn't have much else with it other than the boss fight, but in the case of Doomsday Zone, there literally is nothing else. No build-up, no story, it's just the final boss while collecting the 7 Chaos Emeralds. So let's get into what these bosses have and my opinion on them, whether good or bad. Well, there really isn't much to talk about when it comes to Doomsday Zone. Heck, there isn't even a ground to stand on. And that's why the only thing I have to say when it comes to bad things is the first boss fight, and this is actually for a really good reason. Simply put, the first boss is fundamentally a bad one. From the way it hits you, to the way you hit it, to the amount of rings before it, to the amount of hits it takes, it's all horrible. The beginning of Doomsday Zone can give you up to 50 rings if you know what you're doing, but most of the time you'll end up with 30 or so rings, while also having it constantly drained. The boss fight doesn't help with that at all. Since the boss can't be damaged by Supersonic alone, you need to take the rocket to send at you and direct it to its head. This on its own is extremely tedious, especially since the rockets send you hilariously far on impact, but to add on to this, the boss also shoots out these tiny little beams that comes in multiples. If a single one hits you, you get sent back the same way you do when a rocket hits you, but the thing is, you barely have any rings, you have no indication of when the boss is gonna die, so you always need to be on alert, you're constantly getting bombarded with the little pellets and making you not able to home the rockets properly, and even if you do beat the boss, there's still a chance that the long cutscene that plays will just kill you anyway, since you still lose rings. I don't get why this is, considering the fact that after the second boss, your rings do stop depleting, so there's no reason why it shouldn't here. And that's the main issue I have with Doomsday Zone. And that means that everything else makes Doomsday Zone overall a great send-off to the classic Sonic era. Let's talk about that too. The first thing I'd like to point out as a major good thing about Doomsday Zone is its amazing visuals. Seriously, Death Egg Act 2's background was really cool, showing the planet and all, but if you compare the two, there's an obvious difference. I couldn't really tell you why, but it seems Death Egg Act 2's background is much more grey and white than Doomsday Zone. And considering the background for the two are pretty much the same thing, I think Doomsday Zone's background is very pleasing to look at, especially when nothing is obscuring it from view. Not to say that the boulders look bad because they don't. I mean, what did you expect? It's just a boulder, they can't screw that up bad enough for me to call it a problem. So, the visual aspect of Doomsday Zone is very nice. Another thing that actually shocked me is the amazing music. Like, seriously, for the final zone of the game, you can feel the tension in the music leading to the final push before you defeat Eggman once and for all. Overall, I won't say it's a track that should be heard outside of the game, and it definitely isn't a favorite of mine, but the stakes the song carries are extremely nice. The last thing I'd want to put on this list is actually kind of a stretch, being the second boss fight. And from an outside view, it really doesn't seem all that good. By the time you reach the boss, you'd have about 20 rings, and you can just continuously boost through and beat the boss without going out of your way to collect some. Its attacks are very lackluster, at most they halt you for a second or two, and generally it doesn't seem very good. But that's the point. Eggman has carried the Master Emerald through the Death Egg into the Death Egg robot, then he carried it out to try and escape, then he holds it in the first boss, and this is his final escape. And the second boss is very good at running away and halting you. And it is very fun to tell yourself that you aren't going to collect another ring, and to try your best and beat it then and there, or you could just not hit it at all and get extra rings for safety. Again, it certainly isn't the best final fight I've seen, I'd reckon Sonic 2's is better, but it isn't bad by any means of the word. I most likely won't make a Mania review because it's just going to be really hard to review, you know? Sonic Superstars review will not be coming anytime soon. Yeah, I know I said I wouldn't be doing a Sonic Superstars review anytime soon, but that was because I thought that I should move on from the classics after Sonic CD. I tried doing that by reviewing Shattered Generations, and that couldn't have gone any worse than it did. I then made a poll, and the results are pretty obvious. So, before we actually have nothing else to review when it comes to the classic Sonic era, let's review Sonic Superstars, the latest classic Sonic game. We start off with Bridge Island Zone, which is a totally new zone we've never seen before. Yeah, sure. But to be completely honest, Bridge Island is one of the best zones in Sonic Superstars. It has extremely great flow, introduces the player to the new level design and gimmicks, and actually has good bosses. This might be a bit confusing to say, especially since the mini-boss of the zone is just you running away from the boss, meaning no fighting actually happens, and the first main boss is just a way for you to test out the emerald powers. Considering what we have coming up, that's probably more of a good thing than you may think. The only real problem I have with Bridge Island is the fact that the giant rings are a little easy to find. I do know that it's the first zone in the game, and considering how easy it is to find giant rings in Angel Island, you'd think this would be a non-issue. But in Angel Island, giant rings were behind rocks and hidden to some extent, not just out in the open. All in all though, a great zone. Good music, nice visuals, not horrible boss fight, and very easy level design, as one would expect. Next up, we have Speed Jungle, easily the best zone in Sonic Superstars. And the main reason why is due to the flow the level has. When you're sliding down the vines, not stopping at all, dodging obstacles and jumping to clear roadblocks that would have killed your momentum, it's the pinnacle of Sonic Superstars gameplay. The environment is also really cool, somehow distinguishing itself from Jungle Zone while also being reminiscent. But that's nothing compared to its music. This is the best music in the game, which is kind of concerning for the overall quality of Sonic Superstars. Unlike Bridge Island, the giant rings are better, and take some level of intelligence to find. This is also where we get introduced to character-specific zones, and lo and behold, the first one in the game is also the best. It just takes what was already a good idea for the zone and cranks it up to 11. With Fang chasing you, and drop dashing down the vines is always super fun to do. And when it comes to the bosses, well, they're manageable. The mini-boss is fine. I think it has absolutely nothing to do with the jungle theming unlike Bridge Island, but there's really nothing wrong with it. But the boss itself is probably where things start to go downhill. You can't damage it, and attacks are all things you need to be ready for, meaning reacting to them can a lot of the time be impossible. It's still not a bad boss, just the worst one yet. Wow, this is actually going pretty well. Bridge Island and Speed Jungle are two zones I actually like. Too bad the third one is also pretty good. Yes, for the first time in Krheanos Island history, there's actually a time where the first three zones of a game are all good in my eyes. Sky Temple is definitely more of a stretch than the first two, but it's definitely not bad at all. Firstly, the music isn't exactly something I'm a fan of unlike the other two zones, but it definitely is better than some of the later zones in the game, so it gets a pass because believe me when I say, the music in the zones get much worse. Another iffy thing about Sky Temple Zone is the level design, especially the later parts of the zone. To be honest, it's kinda confusing, when I wasn't even able to do it normally, but with the bullet ability it wasn't too hard. On the complete flip side, almost everything else is really cool. I love the environment of the zone, little things like the cloud enemy are also a nice touch, and the gimmicks are really kind as well. But the boss is also something I dislike. I definitely feel like this one is more of a skill issue than me actually having real criticism for it, but the idea wasn't executed very well, and I feel a lot of attacks either need to be known when they happen, or are just straight up impossible to dodge. So, we've done 3 good zones in a row. Do you think we can do 4? No. No, we couldn't go 4 zones in a row. Next up, we have Pinball Carnival Zone, and this is where things start to get a bit more in the negative category of zones. But this is just the beginning of the bad segments, so there are some really amazing aspects that I like about this level. For example, a lot of the gimmicks in the zone are actually really cool, some being in concept only, like the red and blue flames, and some in concept and execution, like the roller coasters that show up in Act 2. Another thing that is good is the bosses. These not only have really cool visual designs, but is also better than the bosses from Speed Jungle. But on the opposite end, the music is extremely bland, the level design is either utilizing gimmicks horribly like the fire, or just straight up annoying to play, like having areas only accessible by very specific bounces, which, for the 4th zone of a 12 zone game, is just extremely unnecessary. The visuals of the zone are standard for the themed levels with similar aesthetics, and the Tails Doll cameo is pretty cool, but this is definitely where zones of the game start scoring below a 6 out of 10. Not even kidding, this has to be one of the most confusing zones I've ever played. Lagoon City Zone does so many good things, you'd think it's the best zone in the game, but it does so much bad that you'd think it's the worst. For example, along with Speed Jungle, this zone has some of the best music in the entire game. It fits the water theme perfectly, and is also a very enjoyable track overall. The giant ring placements are also really good. I must say that unlike the average Sonic Zone, going up doesn't mean you instantly find the entrances to the special stage. And the level design is also extremely well made, with huge slides that are a lot more fun than other water levels. But actually, level design isn't always so good in Lagoon City. When underwater, the game doesn't just feel slow, it feels boring. There's nothing to avoid, there's nothing to look forward to, and I have no idea why they thought the bubble gimmick was a good idea to bring from Mania. Thankfully, you can actually skip a lot of the water in this zone. Another bad thing that Lagoon City has are its bosses. The mini-boss isn't that bad. Having an electric boss in a water zone is actually kind of original from classic Sonic, but I feel like the boss lacks any sort of vibe. It kind of just feels like, oh, it's a mini-boss, and not something like, that mini-boss was really cool. Overall, it has a decent concept, but a really bad execution. But the boss is really where the main complaint of Sonic Superstars starts to shine. In case you haven't already noticed, the main thing that people can objectively point to when it comes to the negatives of Sonic Superstars are the grueling bosses, and Lagoon City is no exception. Sometimes when a platform is meant to rise, it just doesn't, and some sections drag on for no good reason. The final section took me a long time to understand, and I always felt that throughout the fight, there were always 10-second sections where I had nothing but fear confusion throughout it. Overall, it's a below average zone at worst and mid at best, but trust me, things are about to get a lot worse. Well, we've made it. Welcome to the beginning of what I can safely call bad zones from Sonic Superstars. So, how are we starting this off? Already, we plunge into one of my least favorite zones. Unlike levels like Speed Jungle and Lagoon City, which are partially inspired by Jungle Zone from the Sonic 1 Master System and Hydro City from Sonic 3, Sad Sanctuary just doesn't have a shred of originality in it. It also starts the trend where giant rings are no longer difficult to get and require skill, and where they just start being annoying to get. I personally don't have a good track record with sand-themed areas, but this is especially bad, and the level design overall with its carelessly placed enemies and unexciting gimmicks is just horrible. To be completely honest, however, the music is pretty good, but that should be a given considering who composed it, and that doesn't really help much when you consider that we still haven't even talked about the worst part of the level. I don't think I have ever played such an infuriating boss fight in my entire life up until this point. It takes Lagoon City's confusion with horribly long cycles, and if you don't know what you're doing, heck, even if you do know what you're doing, the boss will most likely take most time to beat, and it will take longer than the time you actually took to beat the level. Alright, so saying Sanctuary. what I already consider to be a bad zone in the game. I wonder what's next. Oh, come on. I'm not even gonna try to introduce any aspect of this level, because this level literally doesn't do a single thing right. And that's not even an exaggeration. Press Factory is hands down the worst zone in the entire game. And considering what's after this, I'm surprised that's even a possibility. To start off, the level design is absolutely abysmal. Think of Scrap Brain Zone from Sonic 1, but with even more annoying objects and a very stupid gimmick that makes you lose control for no apparent reason. Yes, you can see in the background for when exactly it's going to push you upwards, but really think about that. In order for me to properly use an already bad gimmick, the way I have to use it is for me to look at the background. It doesn't help that you just don't roll into a ball, so if you're next to an enemy and you suddenly get catapulted upwards, well, that's your problem. And Act 2 has it even worse, with a multitude of crushing walls that appear for no reason other than to make the level more annoying and take longer to get through, like Scrap Brain, and having an even worse gimmick that'll kill you if you don't hit buttons in time. Another aspect of this level I hate is the horrendous music. Like, I'm genuinely surprised by what happened here. We go from Sand Sanctuary, a track I don't necessarily think of as the best, to one of the worst tracks from any Sonic game I have ever heard. There's really nothing to say about it. The visuals of the level are not bad by definition. The second act background is one of my favorites, but that doesn't help the level nearly as much as more innovative levels like Quaz Quadrant in terms of visuals. And the last thing is the two really annoying bosses this level has. The mini-boss doesn't have many offenses, the attacks are understandable and you won't get unfairly hit unless you're not paying attention. But as with every Superstars boss, this also drags on way longer than it should with its long attack cycles. Because of how annoying it gets, it feels a lot more like you're just fighting to stay alive, because if you don't move in time for the hammer, that's an insta-kill. If you get under the platforms, that's also an instant kill. I just can't bring myself to understand why this level needs to be so punishing for no good reason. Overall, definitely a top contender for the worst zone in classic Sonic, but I do think Scrap Brain is still worse in most aspects. After that absolute wreck of a level, we have another zone which is overall a bad one in my opinion, but it's inconsistent that it's honestly shocking to me. For example, the level design is good. It's not great or perfect at all, but I'm taking what I can get. Rings are abundant and it always feels nice to have a lot of them at hand, and all the gimmicks are also really well thought out. Also, visually this is probably the best level in the game just because of how well the colors match together, and the design is really cool. Plus, what do you expect? It has a connection to Sonic 1, of course I'm gonna have something good to say about it. But on the complete opposite end, the boss fights are some of the worst in the game. Not a surprise, classic Sonic doesn't really have a good track record when it comes to bosses in general, and Superstars itself clearly isn't in the conversation of good bosses, but I feel I really need to emphasize this. The mini-boss, it's actually pretty okay. I do think being left with at least 3 rings at the start could have been done, since getting one shot if you don't know what's going on could be annoying, but you have plenty of time to understand, and even if you don't, running away and accessing the situation is also a possible option. Plus, the whole theme of this zone is getting a lot of rings. Having the mini-boss be a metallic piggy bank is some of the most creative things I've seen from a classic Sonic game. But unfortunately, I don't have those same pleasantries for the actual boss of the game. Because it's the second worst boss. This boss fight is literally just flat out annoying for no real reason. There's literally no purpose why Golden Capital's boss should be so much more harder and annoying than any other normal boss in the game. And that's because a lot of the problems that the boss has aren't even the boss's fault. For one, the camera in these base sections could not be more infuriating. Trying to collect a ring or two after a stressful fight only for you to get hit by a geyser of fire that you could have never seen coming is just bad game design. If you lose your rings during the fight, that's your fault, and until Fang goes into a base section, I guess you just gotta figure it out. And that's even if there is a base part, because after the upgrade, if you have no rings, then you're screwed and you have to clutch it up for the whole rest of the fight. I don't really understand why there's a lack of rings in the first section before the upgrade, but at least in that situations, there's rings to look forward to. In the second part, I believe they should have put rings, even if it's just 3 or 4. The boss doesn't really suffer from it and I don't have to start all the way back from the beginning of the fight. Overall, Golden Capital is just average. Great visuals, level design and music, but horrible boss fights that drive me crazy. I'm not gonna lie, when this zone was shown for the trailer in the game, I was actually pretty hyped for it. I thought it'd be really cool to play this zone, and honestly, I don't have any idea why I put such expectations on the zone in particular. Not to worry though, this zone did disappoint me, but that's not necessarily a bad thing for the zone. Since I set some pretty high expectations for Cyber Station, and I've had time to lower those expectations, I feel it's actually quite a decent level. I really like this pixelated style that the zone goes for, and the level design, while definitely not being of the best, is definitely not offensive in any way. The music is also pretty good, nothing like Lagoon City or Speed Jungle, but it fits the theming of the level properly and doesn't use any annoying instruments. The boss is definitely my favorite part of the zone though, because of the actual difficulty. I'm not going to deny it, I actually died a lot during this fight. But unlike a lot of the Superstars boss fights, every time I lose, I always feel it's because I wasn't paying attention or I wasn't looking ahead, not because the boss was going on for 5.5 minutes and I really wasn't going to survive anyway. Overall, I actually like this zone, which is rare when it comes to the second half of the game. Okay, but seriously, what even is this zone? Like, I'm genuinely not kidding. Does anybody have any memory of playing this zone at all? This zone is probably one of the most boring and forgettable zones in the game, and that's not even because it doesn't have any offenses to it. For one, the entire second act of the zone should be a thing on its own. I have no idea what Sonic teams deal with having a completely good setup for a boss and just replacing it with shoot. And other than that, the actual second act isn't even really an act, and it would have been a lot better if there was an actual level before the shooter section, even if it was shorter. The music is also extremely mediocre, the staple for Sonic Superstars music. It's not some horrible track, but I really wonder what happened because comparing the two halves of the game is like day and night. And Act 1, it's fine. I definitely don't have any problem with it aside from some crushing objects, and the player vault gimmick is pretty cool. It's just that while it doesn't have any notable problems with it, it also doesn't strive for anything better than the normal decent level. And the last thing I want to comment on when it comes to Frozen Base is the mini-boss, because it's pretty cool. Yeah, beforehand I'd heard this boss was extremely tricky and frustrating, but in my run-through I didn't die once. Plus, I do think that having a boss fight that has Sonic running constantly is pretty cool. Overall, a decent Act 1 that got completely destroyed by a nuisance of an Act 2. Now, I wouldn't say I particularly like this level, but I really do like what it was going for. Obviously, there are some glaring issues, like how anytime you're in a crushing platform section, you need to slow down so that the reverse version can happen properly. There's the unfair enemy placements and the slow anti-gravity sections. But I like that while all of these things are genuinely things that I see wrong with the gimmicks of the level, it doesn't necessarily make it bad. Other than that, the level design is pretty standard stuff. It's also really cool that the level design was made specifically in mind so that you could do it in reverse for Act 2. Personally, I think Sonic Team just didn't want to make more level design, but I think I'm happier this way. The visuals, even though it's something we've seen plenty of times, is still really wait a second. Is that the end from Sonic Frontiers? Sorry. What I meant to say is that Egg Fortress's background is easily the best background in the entire game and completely overthrows the others. So it seems the final zone of the game is pretty decent. But that's until we get into the final boss fights. I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it or even try to ease into it. Sonic Superstars' final boss is by far the worst thing I've ever played, and it isn't close. To get into perspective how unnecessarily difficult the final boss of this game is, my recording session containing the last 3 zones of the game is 90 minutes in total, and 50 minutes of that is just me trying to beat this dumb boss over and over again. I'm not trying to say that now that I beat it, I can understand its difficulty and how it's okay. Because honestly, the lack of communications in some parts, just not knowing what to do or where to do it, the lack of reaction time to something you've never seen before, and the sheer amount of time this boss takes is enough for me to deem it beyond any type of redemption. I don't know how in somebody's right mind would this be the final boss in the game. In fact, I know nobody in their right minds would make this the final boss. You know why? Because this literally isn't the final boss! Does anybody remember when it was announced that Sonic Superstars would be 24 hours long? When I heard that, I was convinced it was some sort of joke, but looking at it play out now, it's just brutal. You're telling me that even though I legitimately just finished beating that horrible boss and beating the game, I need to do all of that again with a slightly better final boss and some horrible asset usage as a sorry excuse for that difficulty? And Matt Has No Cut to Superstars video, he said something that I actually really agree with. He said that Trip's story should have been optional, and this would have made it so that people who like to have an extra challenge can pick it up, while the less intrigued players can move straight to the final boss. So yes, Trip's story is literally the same as Sonic's, just worse and even harder. So I'll pass on that. There's no way I'm playing this game anymore than I need to. So because this is the exact same playthrough of the game, just made it even more annoying to beat than it already was, there's really not much to talk about, except for one key difference. Instead of fighting Eggman as the final boss of the game, you fight Fang instead, and it's just a bit better than the Eggman boss. This isn't because they added rings to the boss so that it would be manageable, or added checkpoints in, or really all that much. Heck, some even really dumb moves like the one where Fang raises up a platform, then he bashes his head into it is also here, and that's arguably worse than the Eggman boss. The thing that makes it better is the phases. In the Eggman boss, phase 1 was the phase where he threw those blue rockets and built the floor around, and you could see his entire mech. In phase 2, you can't see all of it and the ground becomes more of an important aspect. But in Fang's fight, his phase 1 isn't the same as Eggman's phase 1. He's still in the Golden Capital mech and his attacks are more manageable, despite some of them being complete insta-kills. And when Fang does enter his second phase, it is very similar to Eggman's first phase, making the boss in itself be a bit easier than the final fight in the original story. Normally I might start saying that, oh, it's not original, it's not innovative, but honestly, at this point, I don't think that's the main issue. So yes, Trip's story is overall even worse than original Superstars. So after 2 playthroughs of the game, we finally reached the actual final boss of the game, and it's a dragon. Now, I don't know what kind of crazy context clues you would need to possibly actually see this coming or even how it makes sense, but I digress. It's a boss, so let's play it. So how do I feel about the final boss of the game? Well, I'm actually quite surprised that this fight is a lot better than the other 2 final bosses. It certainly isn't any Doomsday Zone or Egg Reverie, but with the Eggman and Fang bosses in mind, this one doesn't do anything all that bad. You fly around, collecting rings, dodging attacks, and hitting the boss. It's alright. Obviously, there's a one problem where the attack patterns are extremely slow, which makes the boss drag on for a lot longer than it needs to, but in all honesty, that's a problem for almost every boss now, so there's no point really calling it out. And after beating the boss fight and Reef using evil containment to seal the dragon away for the rest of time, we come to the end of the game. And that's Sonic Superstars, what I think will be the actual final game I'll be reviewing from the classic Sonic games. Sonic Mania might be a possibility. That depends on the feedback I receive for this video, as well as for the next video after the special video I have planned. I did see that leaving the classic Sonic era entirely didn't go so well, so I'm really starting to wonder if I should stray away from the reviews. I do still want to, but judging from what happened, I think it's possible that would be a bad idea. Do I start a super long review of the entirety of Sonic Adventure, or do I maybe even move toward the 8-bit games? I'm not sure, but I'm sure I'll figure it out. Either way, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. If you want to see a playlist of all the reviews I've done, they're in the description. And have a good day or night wherever you are.